the freedom found in total surrender. Tonight, as the world outside slows down and the tension in your shoulders begins its long, slow dissolution, we will explore the exquisite contradiction at the very heart of existence, the relentless struggle between the destiny you seemingly cannot escape and the free choices you feel compelled, day after day, to make. This journey is not meant to keep you awake, but rather to guide your consciousness toward a deeper, quieter awareness, a meditative exploration of the paradoxes that define the human condition. Let the gravity of your impending rest pull your body down, grounding you, but keep your mind just buoyant enough to drift through 30 profound concepts concerning fate and personal agency. Insights, you will find, arrive best when they are not chased down, but received in a state of soft contemplation. As your conscious grip begins to soften, ask yourself this essential question: how much of your life is truly predetermined? How much is yours to sculpt? And what if the ultimate, most profound act of control is ultimately to relinquish it entirely? This brings us to the first great contradiction, the freedom found in total surrender. We spend our lives constructing elaborate psychological defenses, perfecting the art of micromanagement, believing that security is found exclusively in control, prediction, and certainty. Yet we rarely acknowledge the profound, crushing exhaustion that this effort requires. Why is it that the greatest prison we inhabit often wears the comforting disguise of certainty, and true liberation lies just beyond that final, frustrating wall we refuse to tear down? To surrender, in this context, is not an act of defeat. It is the radical acceptance of reality as it is. It is the philosophical recognition of the precise boundary where your agency ends and the vast, chaotic indifference of the universe begins. This distinction is crucial. Surrender is not apathetic resignation. It is highly strategic alignment. It is the wisdom to stop fighting battles that were never yours to win in the first place, thereby conserving the necessary energy to truly influence the variables that are within your sphere of influence. We waste so much vital force trying to enforce our will upon the flow of external events that were already set in motion before we even conceived of them. Consider the metaphor of the swimmer caught in a powerful, unpredictable current, the current of life, the current of illness, the current of economic downturn, the current of aging. The natural, instinctual response is to thrash, to panic, to expend all available energy fighting the water, desperately trying to muscle your way back to the shore you left behind. This struggle consumes you entirely. You exhaust yourself struggling against the river, convinced that the moment you stop struggling, you will surely drown. But the profound paradox is this: if you manage to relax your muscles, align your body with the direction of the water's force, and stop kicking against the momentum, you float. You do not gain control over the river. That remains an impossibility. But you immediately gain total control over your reaction to the river, and in that cessation of resistance, you find buoyancy and rest. The tension we feel comes from the ego's demand for authorship. We have conflated identity with continuous, successful manipulation of outcomes. We believe that if we stop steering, we stop existing, that if we concede uncertainty, we concede our destiny. The internal conflict is relentless because the conscious mind views letting go as a failure state. But in that moment of genuine surrender, the mind shifts its posture dramatically, moving from anxious, exhausting prediction to present, non-judgmental observation. The profound, freeing paradox lies in recognizing that the decision to stop deciding on things outside your control is itself a monumental choice. Perhaps the deepest and most impactful choice we can ever make. When we apply this to modern life, we see the exhaustion manifesting in the compulsive need to control career trajectories, to manage the emotional states of others, or to plan every perfect minute of tomorrow's schedule. We are haunted by the illusion that exhaustive preparation can somehow negate chance. Surrender, instead, invites us to recognize the essential productive 20% of effort that moves us forward, and to willfully release the unproductive, destructive 80% of worrying, agonizing, and hypothetical problem solving. What changes within us is the sheer weight of self-imposed responsibility for forces far beyond our capacity to tame. You stop holding yourself hostage to outcomes that are simply random, collective, or governed by laws indifferent to your personal schedule. The psychological focus shifts away from controlling the macro structure of destiny and towards perfecting the quality of your response in the immediate micro moment. When you fully accept the existing reality, the brutal, beautiful is, you simultaneously free up the mental capital needed to effectively influence what could be. Freedom is never the absence of limits. It is the acceptance, the soft embrace of the unavoidable ones. Peace arrives not through conquering reality, but through befriending it, realizing that sometimes the only way forward is to stop rowing, turn the boat over, and simply trust the incomprehensible depth beneath you. The tyranny of the known future. The tyranny of the known future. The moment the roadmap is finalized, the genuine journey ends. What if your greatest freedom lay not in charting the perfect course, but in the sheer, terrifying fog of the unknown? Breathe. We fear uncertainty, yet certainty itself can be the most effective cage. This concept isn't about some rigid fate handed down by the cosmos. It's about the self-imposed prison of prediction. In our relentless pursuit of data, foresight, and optimized outcomes, in the age of the algorithm, we are attempting to eliminate the variables of existence. We crave a world where risks are mitigated and choices are validated before they are even made. The known future is a theoretical space where all probabilities have collapsed into one single, highly probable trajectory. The tyranny arises because once that trajectory is accepted as fact, all choices become mere decoration, actions taken only to fulfill the prophecy, not to create new meaning. We trade the possibility of genuine radical surprise for the cold comfort of a validated expectation. We become victims of our own foresight. Imagine you are given a perfect, scientifically guaranteed printout of your life from this moment until your death. Every job, every relationship, every regret, every small moment of joy or frustration, it's all there, detailed on crisp, white paper. You hold the complete, unalterable book of your remaining years. At first, there is an enormous wave of relief. The struggle is over. The crippling anxiety of choosing incorrectly vanishes. But soon, a deep, corrosive panic sets in. When you wake up tomorrow morning, do you choose the coffee or the tea because you genuinely desire it? Or because chapter 4, page 7, line 12 explicitly states, "She poured the dark, bitter coffee"? Your free will hasn't been philosophically disproven. It's been practically preempted. You are no longer living. You are merely executing the script given to you by the ghost of your own perfect knowledge. The paradox here is brutal. The act of achieving perfect knowledge of the future destroys the significance of the present action. If you know with absolute certainty that you will succeed, the effort required loses its meaning. It becomes mechanical obedience. The satisfaction derived from overcoming struggle evaporates. Conversely, if you know you will fail, why bother exerting the energy to try at all? The delicious tension of choice, that beautiful, chaotic space where genuine possibility resides, is flattened into a predetermined inevitability. We seek control through knowledge, but the ultimate knowledge results in the ultimate surrender. We become ghosts haunting our own trajectory, spectators watching a cinematic version of our lives unfold. The pursuit of the known future is a self-sabotaging loop. We strive for certainty to feel secure, but achieving that certainty removes the fundamental insecurity, the capacity to choose differently, that defines the core of human existence. This isn't just abstract philosophy, it's the air we breathe in the modern world. We outsource our uncertainty to AI predictors, to 5-year plans, to self-help gurus, and to predictive analytics that tell us exactly what we should buy, love, and become to maximize statistical happiness. Every optimization, Every life hack designed to eliminate failure and surprise inches us closer to this tyranny. We build elaborate safety nets against all risk, but risk is the birthplace of radical transformation and unexpected growth. We become so focused on hitting the statistical mean, on achieving the expected outcome, that we forget the truly revolutionary moments in a life are always outliers, the things no data model could have ever predicted. We trade the rich texture of potential for the smooth, sanitized surface of certainty. What changes inside us when we acknowledge this tyranny is our relationship with agency. If the future is merely a destination we are compelled to walk toward, we are simple travelers. If the future is a fixed script we must fulfill, we are just actors reading lines. But if the future is a vast, unwritten ocean, perpetually shifting and undefined, we become navigators, and that is where the soul truly awakens. The acceptance of the unknown is the key to psychological liberation. It allows failure to be a deviation, a lesson in adaptation, not a rigid destiny, and it allows success to be a triumph of improvisation, not just scheduled maintenance. We reclaim the power of the now. The highest act of free will might not be the choice we ultimately make, but the refusal to believe for even a moment that the next moment has already been written. So, let the map tear. Let the path disappear into the immediate foreground. In the darkness of the unpredictable, you are finally truly free. The choice that confirms the prophecy. This block is about the Ouroboros of anticipation. You believe you are fighting fate, moving mountains to avoid a specific, dreaded outcome. But what if the weapon you chose was merely a stage direction? What if your valiant, deliberate effort to escape was the single, necessary action required to lock the prophecy into place? Take a deep breath. We are only examining the script. We must talk about the fatalistic loop. This is not just about things happening to you, but about the unique psychological trap where the knowledge, or even the whispered fear, of a prediction forces you into actions designed to avoid it, yet which inevitably guarantee its arrival. It is the prophecy that cannot exist until you try to dismantle it. It asks a terrifying question. If your choice was truly free, why would the prediction hold any power at all? Consider the classic narrative of the oracle, the king, and the son. The king hears the chilling prediction. His son will overthrow him. Most simple concepts of fate stop there, suggesting the outcome is inevitable regardless of action. But the fatalistic loop only truly begins when the king, in an act of what he believes is supreme free will, the choice to defy destiny, takes drastic measures: banishment, imprisonment, assassination. It is precisely these desperate, self-aware attempts to escape the predicted outcome that often set the son on the unique, hardened path necessary to fulfill the ancient words. The child grows up fueled by resentment, alienated by the king's fear, and ultimately driven back to the throne by the very circumstances created by the king's preemptive panic. Your action, born of refusal, becomes the necessary precursor. The free choice to defy was the precise mechanism of destiny. The mechanism is the tension between action and intent. You intend freedom, but you execute dependence. Fear is the engine. When the oracle speaks, it doesn't necessarily create your destiny, it creates your fear. And fear is the single most predictable mover of human behavior. You react, you pivot, you dedicate all your energy to rerouting the cosmic highway. But what if the prophecy already accounted for your rebellion? What if the king always tries to banish the son? Then your act of rebellion, which felt so visceral and unique to you, was merely the final critical step in the cosmic sequence. You thought you were breaking the chain. You were actually hammering the last link into place. This suggests that the prophecy isn't about the outcome itself, but about the shocking inevitability of your predictable response to the warning. We engage in this loop constantly, even in the mundane parts of our lives. This isn't just ancient myth. Think about worry. You are worried about failing, perhaps a presentation or a critical exam. In your attempt to conquer this fear, you overcompensate. You become stressed, nervous, or so rigidly attached to the desired outcome that you compromise your natural flow and flexibility. This hyper-anxiety ironically hinders your performance and causes the very failure you feared. Or consider the relationship you fear losing. Your intense, controlling effort to preserve every facet of it suffocates the other person, guaranteeing the distance and eventual loss. We confirm our worst fears not through fatalistic inaction, but through hyperaction fueled by preemptive anxiety. Our free will, when guided by the prophecy's shadow, becomes highly deterministic. The profound terror this raises is the possibility that your most earnest, rebellious choices, the ones you pride yourself on, are actually the least free of all. They are merely the fulfilling of variables already set within the cosmic system. If your conscious attempt to escape your fate is your fate, where does agency truly reside? This paradox hollows out the notion of self-determination, when the self is revealed to be the easiest piece on the board to manipulate. Perhaps true freedom isn't defiance, but indifference to the prediction, the radical, quiet choice not to engage with the fear the oracle handed you. But even that indifference, we must ask, might have been predicted. The ultimate trick of destiny is not to hide your fate from you, but to convince you that you must desperately fight it. And as you raise your sword high in rebellion, you look down to realize that the sword is the final, perfect key to the lock you were trying to escape. Few arrive here awake. Leave your mark with a like. It helps this reflection reach others who seek truth before sleep. The archive of decisions never made, the counterfactual archive. If the universe is infinitely large, how much of your current reality is defined not by what you chose, but by what you refused? We celebrate free will for the action it takes, the path it selects, the commitment it makes. But every choice is also a massive, silent act of negation. Every road taken demands the immediate destruction of all roads not taken. These are the counterfactuals, the career you dismissed, the person you never introduced yourself to, the argument you decided to swallow. They form an invisible archive housed deep within your consciousness, a library where every volume is bound in the heavy leather of what if. This archive is relevant because, in the moment of choice, the potential path held just as much reality, just as much genuine energy as the actual path. You didn't just choose a direction, you created a graveyard of potential selves. Imagine for a moment a museum specifically dedicated to the self you almost became. The lighting in this place is always dim, perpetually set to twilight. On the walls are the portraits of the spouse you didn't marry, the city you decided against moving to, the difficult conversation you abandoned 5 seconds before starting it. These portraits are accurate, hauntingly detailed representations of a self that existed only in the instant before your final commitment. Perhaps there's a whole wing dedicated to the habits you almost adopted, the self who woke up at 5 a.m. every day. The self who finally learned that second language, the self who quit that one dependency 3 years ago. This museum is silent, heavy with the dust of non-experience, and you are the only curator. You visit it, often unconsciously, every time regret whispers, or when boredom demands a hypothetical escape from the present moment. Here is the paradox housed within that museum. Your current identity is celebrated for the firmness of its decisions, yet it is perpetually burdened by the sheer volume of the decisions it has avoided. We anchor our certainty to our present location, yet that location is defined by an absolute lack of movement toward every other potential point on the map. You are tethered to the reality you inhabit, but the gravitational pull of all the unmade decisions constantly tugs at your periphery. This is the psychological equivalent of quantum mechanics. Until you observed and committed to one life, all those alternative selves were equally probable, equally real possibilities spinning in the void. But the very act of observing and living your life now collapses the wave function of possibility into the hard, singular particle of this is. This collapse leaves behind a tremendous amount of psychic debris, the remnants of those potential existences. This archive is what fuels the insidious, low-frequency hum we call modern anxiety. It is the core mechanism behind FOMO, the fear of missing out. It is not just the fear of missing an event. It is the deep, persistent fear that an adjacent self, the one you chose against, is having a better, richer, more authentic experience than the one you committed to. We scroll through carefully curated social media feeds, treating other people's actual choices as if they were still available, easily accessible counterfactuals for us. We allow the ghosts of the archive to dictate the value and the scarcity of our present moment. Every time you see someone thriving on a path you abandoned, a small, cold draft from the doors of your counterfactual archive sneaks into your real life. The philosophical demand this archive makes is an acceptance of necessary destruction. To build one structure requires the ritual sacrifice of the materials that could have built every other structure. The mature understanding of destiny is realizing that your fate is not just defined by the structure of what is, but by the deliberate, necessary absence of what could have been. If you can look into the dim, echoing rooms of that museum and acknowledge the true cost without immediately succumbing to paralyzing regret, you unlock a profound stillness. You realize that the energy spent grieving those unrealized timelines, that potential income, that potential love, that potential city, is energy stolen from the one timeline that desperately needs your full and unreserved participation, the now. The only way to truly empty the counterfactual archive is to fill your present so completely that the silence of the paths not taken no longer echoes louder than the sound of your own footsteps. The inevitable weight of infinite options. The tyranny of maximum freedom. Have you ever felt more constrained by an open door than by a locked one? We assume that absolute freedom, the total capacity to choose anything at any moment, is the highest ideal of free will. We believe that constraints are the enemy. Yet the paradox isn't about the lack of options, it is about the unbearable, crushing pressure of having too many paths you are now responsible for rejecting. This is the heavy, paradoxical truth of maximum freedom. We define free will as the ability to choose without external coercion, the singular power to dictate the direction of your own being. But what happens when that choice is stretched across an infinite manifold of possibilities, when every path is open, every outcome achievable, and every moment is a zero-sum game against the vastness of potential? This is the cosmic responsibility of realizing that for every life you choose to pursue, an infinity of possible selves, of possible careers, passions, relationships, and even personalities, dies unlived in that very moment of commitment. The weight is not the choosing, but the inherent and necessary loss that infinite choice demands. To grasp this weight, imagine yourself as the sole architect of your own existence. You are handed not one blueprint or 10, but every single possible blueprint that could ever be drawn for a human life. You stand in the center of the cosmic library of Babel, where every book, every story, every possible narrative of your journey resides on the infinite shelves. Your task is simple. Pick one spine, pull it out, and start reading your life. But as you reach out, you are paralyzed by the faint, shimmering hum of the infinite volumes you are ignoring. The stress is not in the reading or the drawing or the living. It is solely in the choosing of the initial line, knowing that its establishment automatically negates every other possibility. The tension arises directly from the human maximization instinct. If we possess infinite freedom, then the internal philosophical pressure demands that we must make the perfect choice, the path that yields the optimal, most fulfilling life. But perfection is a ghost in the infinite. The standard of success rises proportionally to the number of options available. When options are few, a satisfactory choice is simple. When options are limitless, satisfactory is an unacceptable compromise. The pursuit of the best option ensures you are perpetually trapped in the vetting phase, the analysis paralysis that precedes action. You cannot commit because committing means acknowledging that a better path might exist, and you willingly, foolishly forfeited it. This state of hyper-awareness regarding opportunity cost becomes its own highly sophisticated psychological prison, often more restrictive than any external decree of fate. We see this mechanism everywhere in modern life. The ability to access millions of potential connections through algorithms or thousands of different jobs across the globe should feel totally liberating. Yet, it often generates overwhelming decision fatigue, analysis paralysis, and the pervasive gnawing feeling of fear of missing out, FOMO, or even more acutely, fear of better options, FOBO. Freedom, in the digital age of infinite access, often translates into a deep, personalized anxiety. We are free, but we are too terrified to use that freedom decisively. The profound philosophical shift we must undergo is realizing that destiny might be less a cosmic decree written in the stars and more a necessary, self-imposed psychological tool. Faced with infinity, we often subconsciously impose limits on our options. We commit to a narrow path, a specific definition of self, a singular story, just to function. We trade infinite, paralyzing freedom for finite, actionable meaning. The greatest, most potent act of free will, therefore, might not be the capacity to choose everything, but the terrifying and voluntary choice to be constrained by something, by an oath, by a purpose, or by a commitment to the present path. You do not gain power by expanding your choices. You gain definition by limiting them. The moment you achieve absolute freedom, you confront not liberation, but the responsibility of the void. And you discover that the greatest weight you carry is not the chains of external fate, but the infinite, invisible scaffolding of all the unchosen, better lives you never dared to live. That is the inevitable weight of infinite options. The effort required to fulfill a script, the self-executing prophecy. You wake up knowing, deep down, what you are meant to do. Perhaps not the granular details, but the unavoidable trajectory. You feel the pull of your future self, the one who has already accomplished the thing you are striving for right now. If that achievement is guaranteed, if the climax of your life has already been written into the cosmic ledger, doesn't the striving become pointless? If the destination is fixed, why bother navigating the road? This is the paradox of active fatalism, the inherent contradiction that the predetermined outcome requires unpredictable effort to manifest. Destiny is not an unearned inheritance, it is a meticulously constructed performance. If fate has already written your lines, your performance must include the struggle to memorize them, the anxiety of the curtain call, and the sweat that slicks your palms before the pivotal scene. Destiny is not the passive arrival at a guaranteed point, it is the sum total of necessary, mandatory action. Consider the mountaineer whose success is decreed. A cosmic voice assures her that she will reach the summit. Does this assurance magically smooth the granite, alleviate the cold, or prevent the aching burn in her quadriceps? No. The divine decree does not negate the mountain. It merely guarantees that the effort will be made. The prophecy does not remove the difficulty. It mandates that the difficulty must be overcome. She still has to choose the next handhold, still has to fight the urge to sit down in the snow and wait for the summit to descend to her. That decision, the very act of choosing to persist against exhaustion, is the mechanism by which the prophecy is fulfilled. The climb itself is the proof of the preordained success. We tend to see destiny and effort as opposing forces, but they are not. They are two halves of the same operational whole. Destiny is the blueprint. Effort is the construction crew. Fate doesn't necessarily determine what you achieve, but how you achieve it. It mandates the journey, the struggle, the specific type of pain required for your growth. The effort isn't a gamble to change the script. The effort is the script. Think about that project you need to finish, the relationship you need to mend, the difficult conversation you've been avoiding. You feel the gravity of the inevitable result. You know you must do it. But the energy required to pick up the phone, or sit in the quiet room, or draft the final chapter seems immense. It is exactly in this space of resistance that the paradox lives. The moment you decide to quit, you are not failing your destiny. You are merely revealing that your destiny was always to quit at that point. But if your destiny is success, then the struggle you feel right now is simply the necessary tension leading into the victorious action. The effort is the proof that you are still the protagonist of the success story, not a bystander waiting for the finale. This shifts the psychological weight of existence entirely. It transforms destiny from a passive inheritance into an urgent, internal responsibility. You are not waiting for the script to happen to you. You are realizing you are the lead actor whose effort ensures the script happens through you. This realization transforms anxiety into fierce commitment. It is the purest form of motivation, mandatory motivation. It means that the struggle you feel right now is not an indicator of failure or uncertainty, but confirmation that you are operating within the necessary parameters of your success. The difficulty you encounter is not a sign that you should turn back, but the designated cost of the accomplishment that awaits you. Do not confuse the smoothness of fate with the smoothness of the path. The universe only guarantees the final accounting, not the ease of the calculations. The effort is not the attempt to escape destiny, but the way destiny reveals its true demands. It asks you, will you choose the actions required for the conclusion you already know is yours? The script demands the performance, and the performance demands the sweat. Paradox of resisting the already happened. The paradox of resisting the already happened. How much of your current bandwidth, your energy, and your sheer mental volume is dedicated to fighting a memory, a decision, or an immutable event that has already been codified into the bedrock of reality? We often dedicate vast resources to resisting the very structure of time itself. It is a peculiar form of psychological imprisonment. When we refuse to surrender to the definitiveness of the past, we effectively paralyze the present. This concept, the tyranny of the if-only, is less a paradox of destiny and more a profound failure of temporal acceptance. It is the ego's most persistent yet most futile negotiation. We mistake regret for an active tool, believing that if we feel the pain deeply enough, if we review the moments obsessively enough, we might somehow generate an alternative timeline where the event did not occur or where we acted differently. The already happened is anything that, regardless of your current emotional stance or wishful thinking, cannot physically be altered. A word spoken, a path taken, a loss incurred, a consequence delivered. This past event exists not as a fluid memory to be edited, but as a fixed monument within your history. Consider the metaphor of the broken vase. It is fallen. It is shattered. The physical reality of the fragmentation is not debatable. The vase is irrevocably broken. The act of resistance is not trying to find a strong adhesive. That would be constructive repair. The act of resistance is standing amidst the shards, holding the sharp pieces in your hand, and demanding of the universe that the vase become whole again, immediately, without effort, simply because you declare its brokenness unacceptable. You are suffering, not from the initial impact of the vase hitting the floor, but from the refusal to release the sharp edges of the resulting fragments. You are bleeding energy into the impossible task of unshattering reality. The core conflict resides in the mechanism of control. For the ego, acceptance often feels dangerously close to endorsement. We fear that to accept the mistake or the tragedy is to tacitly agree that it was the right outcome, or that we are somehow obligated to feel less pain. This is a profound misunderstanding of surrender. Resisting the already happened is an attempt to exert retroactive free will, trying to control a variable that has already been calculated and set. But the only certainty resistance offers is perpetual suffering. The fight guarantees you stay stuck in the moment the event occurred, forcing your consciousness to repeat the trauma, hoping for a different ending that will never arrive. Look at how this manifests in the present. We are constantly haunted by the ghost of the better decision, the road not taken. We hold ourselves accountable today for the knowledge we only gained after the decision was made. You couldn't possibly have known then what you know now. Yet you crucify your past self for its ignorance. This dynamic prevents us from investing fully in the moment unfolding right now. We carry the heavy, undigested burden of yesterday, contaminating the clarity and potential of today. We become experts at maintaining a narrative of chronic victimhood or crippling inadequacy simply because releasing that narrative feels like letting the event win. The philosophical shift required is subtle but transformative. True freedom is not found in undoing the past. It is found in claiming ownership over the narrative about the past. Acceptance is not resignation, nor is it a passive wave of surrender to fate. It is, in fact, the most violent, forward-moving act of will available to you. It means relocating your energy. Instead of fighting the fixed coordinates of the past event, you pivot and apply that energy to defining the vector of your immediate future response. It changes your identity from the person who was defined by the event to the person who survived the event and chose what came next. The universe has no mechanism for rewind. The past is final. The only act of genuine free will remaining regarding that fixed point is choosing how long you stay chained to its ghost. Let the past finally become history, so the present can at last become experience. Lock. We believe we chose ourselves. Do you ever feel fundamentally trapped by the very routines you fought so hard to build, or confined by commitments that were once the pinnacle of your freedom? This is the quiet, sobering moment when your intentional life structure begins to operate with the cold, impersonal certainty of fate. We are looking at the paradox of chosen confinement, when the decisions you made with perfect free will become the most inflexible determinants of your future. This is the principle of self-fulfilling determinism in action. It's not about destiny imposed by external forces or cosmic decree, but destiny meticulously constructed by your own past self. We begin our lives navigating an endless field of choices, defining ourselves through acts of profound commitment, the career path chosen, the partner promised to, the mortgage signed, the city settled in. These foundational decisions are the ultimate expression of agency and self-sovereignty. But once solidified, these commitments accrue responsibility, investment, and expectation, operating with the mechanical, predictable rigidity of destiny. They limit all subsequent futures by fundamentally solidifying the present. The lock feels secure because you yourself proudly turn the key, sealing the life inside. To understand this tension, consider the ancient thought experiment of the ship of Theseus, but apply it dynamically to your own life trajectory. You begin your journey with the raw, chaotic material of infinite possibility. You then begin to build your vessel with conscious, deliberate acts. You choose a rudder, that's your vocation, directing your momentum. You install heavy anchors, these are your financial or familial responsibilities. You select a reliable crew, your chosen relationships and core community. Every single piece is added intentionally, an expression of perfect agency designed to navigate the seas of life effectively. But a decade later, the ship is so structurally complex, so optimized for its specific chosen route, so deep in debt to its own design, that the idea of abruptly turning south instead of continuing north is not merely a difficult choice. It is a logistical and practical impossibility. The structure built for security has now become a containing force. The ship is no longer a tool of freedom. It is a container for your existence, and the container dictates the journey, even though you remain the ship's original architect. The paradox unfolds in the deep psychological chasm between choosing the constraint and living the consequences of the constraint. When you choose a specific life with such intensity and conviction, you are simultaneously choosing to structurally reject all other possible lives. Freedom lies purely in the selection event. Determinism is the slow, grinding reality of adherence. The underlying tension arises when the present you, perhaps tired, restless, or yearning for novelty, suddenly and deeply resents that enthusiastic, committed engineer of the past self, the one who built this meticulously functional, yet ultimately limiting prison. We often fight fiercely for our chains, celebrating the stability they provide, only to curse their weight when we realize we cannot simply slip them off without damaging the entire edifice, the entire life we now inhabit. We did not just pick a path, we cemented the rails, ensuring that deviation would mean derailment. In our modern existence, defined by high personal investment and complex interdependence, this sense of conscious confinement is dramatically amplified. We invest years into hyper-specialized education, heavy student debt, complex mortgages, demanding career ladders, and sprawling digital identities that anchor us in place. These decisions are profound, conscious choices, often made with the purest intentions of achieving security and success. Yet, when you look closely at the constraints governing a radical desire to leave the city, to change industries entirely, to dissolve a long-term bond, the barriers are rarely external laws or cosmic interference. They are the intricate, self-woven web of practical consequences created entirely by your own historical decisions. You find yourself simultaneously the judge sentencing yourself to the daily routine and the dutiful prisoner who must serve the time. The deepest psychological toll of this realization is the internalization of the conflict. You cannot easily blame fate because you willingly signed the contract. You cannot genuinely blame your past self without undermining the entire foundation of your present identity. This forced realization compels a profound philosophical shift. Perhaps true, mature freedom is not the chaotic ability to choose anything at any given moment, but the difficult, profound acceptance and ownership of the nothing else that your fundamental choices have necessarily locked away. It is the complex peace found in realizing that your current confinement is the direct byproduct of your highest and most intentional acts of agency. You built the walls, block by painstaking block, not to keep the world out, but to secure the specific, fragile, beautiful life you desperately wanted in. And now, the profound paradox of free will is learning to love and accept the very boundaries you set for yourself, even as they chafe against your longing for the infinite. You are serving a sentence of profound satisfaction. The past is simply the future we are stuck in. The paradox of experienced time, the fixed past as the unchangeable future. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of déjà vu, not just as a fleeting neurological glitch, but as the ghost of a decision you haven't made yet? We look backward for answers and forward for freedom, but what if the map we trace today is identical to the path we walked yesterday, merely labeled with tomorrow's date? Take a deep breath. We are about to consider the possibility that memory is not history, but prediction. The foundational premise of linear time tells us the past is fixed and the future is open. The past is fixed because the events are done. They have been witnessed, recorded, and sealed away from alteration. The future, conversely, is characterized by infinite possibility. However, when we integrate the concept of destiny, a completely defined, non-negotiable path dictated by cosmic causality or divine will, the future immediately loses its openness and acquires the static, frozen quality of the past. The definition we explore here is functional immutability. The past is fixed because it is done. The destined future is fixed because it must be done. Therefore, in the eyes of the cosmos, there is no ontological difference between a memory and a script. The relevance lies in how we interpret resistance. Are we resisting history or merely reading the stage directions for tomorrow? Imagine time not as a flowing river, but as a vast, infinitely long film reel stored in a cosmic archive. When you experience the past, you are simply watching the frames that have already been played on the projector screen, their images absolute and unalterable. When you experience the future, you are watching frames that will be played in sequence. The illusion of free choice occurs only in the slight flicker between the frames, a momentary darkness before the next image snaps into focus. Crucially, the light of the projector doesn't create the image. It only illuminates the frame that was already etched onto the celluloid long ago. You are not writing the story. You are the light beam moving across the unchangeable sequence. The tension arises because our conscious experience tells us we chose the past moment, while our philosophical speculation suggests the future is already chosen for us. If we accept the determinist view, then the sensation of choice in the past was an illusion, the brain rationalizing an outcome that was necessary. If that choice was necessary, then every subsequent choice must also be necessary now, following the exact chain of cause and effect that established the previous moment. The mechanism that collapses the past and future into one entity is necessity. Necessity makes the past unchangeable. Necessity makes the destined future unavoidable. The only differentiation factor is memory. We remember the necessity of the past, acknowledging its immutability, but we must live through the necessity of the future, mistaking the process of observation for the act of creation. This paradox manifests in the crushing weight of repetition we feel in our daily lives. Why do we keep making the same mistakes? Why do old behavioral patterns reassert themselves with the force of gravitational law even when we consciously try to avoid them? Because the future patterns we are walking into are simply the echoes of the past architecture we constructed, or perhaps were assigned. When you face a difficult decision today, the tension isn't truly between option A and option B. It's the friction between the self that remembers the pain of the past path and the self that is compelled toward that identical path in the future, driven by the fixed laws of your established character. We are trapped in the archive of our own predictable responses, bound by the inevitability of who we were, and therefore who we must become. The psychological consequence of realizing that the past is the blueprint for the future you are stuck in is initially paralyzing. It shifts the entire meaning of effort and aspiration. If your path is fixed, then resistance is not a struggle against some unknown external force in the future. It is a struggle against the inevitable unfolding of your own character, the very laws that govern your current thoughts and reactions. It implies that your present actions are simply the mandatory prerequisite steps to reach the fixed consequence waiting in the next frame. The profound realization that follows this discomfort is that true freedom might not be the ability to choose a different path, but the ability to change the lens through which you observe the fixed path. We cannot alter the script, but we can alter the quality of awareness we bring to the reading of the lines. We can move from the struggle of resistance to the clarity of acceptance, allowing the necessity of the predetermined moment to wash over us without the internal turbulence of false agency. This is the only space where agency truly resides, not in the event itself, but in the internal witness of the event. You are not moving forward into novelty. You are simply experiencing the fixed reality of the consequences that have always been waiting for you, consequences set in stone by the same laws that defined your yesterday. The difference between destiny and regret is just a matter of timing. The past is simply the future you are stuck in. The necessity of the accidental meeting. The necessity of the accidental meeting. Think of the most important person in your life, your partner, your most crucial collaborator, the connection that fundamentally shifted your trajectory. Now consider the logistics of that first encounter. How close did you come to never meeting them? Did you almost stay home that night because you felt too tired? Did you take the wrong street because of a distraction? That single degree of difference separates your actual lived reality from an infinite, unlived possibility, yet somehow that connection occurred. We tend to label these pivot points as serendipity, the pleasant occurrence of an accident, a gift from pure chance. But let us look closer at the mechanism. If the overall arc of your life requires event A to precede event B, and A only happens because you spilled coffee on your shirt, forcing you to return home and miss your usual train, was the coffee spill accidental, or was it the hidden mechanism of destiny ensuring you were physically present at the required coordinate in time? This concept posits that if the final outcome is fixed, if the destination is mandatory, then every deviation, every perceived mistake, every accident is merely the most elegant and efficient route to that fixed point. Imagine the universe as a vast, complex game of physics, specifically a physicist's billiard table. Every interaction, every collision is strictly deterministic. If you knew the initial position, velocity, and angle of every ball, you could map the future infinitely. Now, layer that table with a thick, heavy fog. When you hit the cue ball, you can only see the first inch of its path. When it ricochets off a cluster of unseen balls and lands perfectly in the side pocket, it felt like a miraculous accident, a stroke of impossible luck. But the physics were never lucky. The necessity was simply obscured by the fog of your limited human perspective. Your accidental meeting is just a series of deterministic events whose inputs were momentarily hidden from your consciousness. Here is the core philosophical tension. The moment of the meeting feels like an active choice. You chose that cafe, you decided to wait 5 extra minutes for a friend who canceled, you asserted your free will in that minute decision. But in retrospect, when you grasp the monumental consequences of that encounter, the meeting feels too perfect, too crucial to have ever been left to the chaos of chance. When you trace the chain of events backward, the flat tire, the wrong turn, the sudden rain, they cease to resemble accidents. They transform into finely tuned, meticulous adjustments made by an unseen engineer to ensure your physical presence at that precise moment in space-time. We attempt to manufacture these necessary accidents constantly in the modern world. Algorithms are today's digital fate weavers, attempting to orchestrate serendipity by introducing variables, people, content, opportunities that we would never have encountered based on our static habits. But the true necessary accident happens when the system fails, when the digital noise drops away. It happens when you drop your phone and look up, when the Wi-Fi cuts out and you are momentarily forced to engage with the immediate physical reality around you. That vulnerability, that brief lapse in the control you usually impose on your environment, is precisely where necessity often chooses to hide. To accept the necessary accident is not to abandon free will, but it profoundly reframes the corrosive power of regret. We often torture ourselves over the choices we made just before a terrible accident or a catastrophic missed opportunity. But if the universe operates on necessary accidents, then every perceived wrong step was simply a required detour, a crucial corrective maneuver the system needed to perform. It transforms the concept of mistake into required navigation. You are never truly lost, only following a highly specific, predetermined maze whose walls appear translucent only after you have successfully navigated past them. The most profound and life-altering decisions will consistently arrive disguised as simple logistical failures or mundane coincidences. You are the protagonist who only finds the essential artifact when you stop actively searching for it, when you finally surrender enough to the chaos to allow the pattern to reveal itself. The accident was necessary because the destination waiting just beyond the fog demanded it. The comfort of having no real control. The great resignation of the will. When was the last time you truly felt relieved by failure? Not the petty disappointment, but the profound, bone-deep relief that whispers, it wasn't up to you anyway. This is the strange, counterintuitive comfort found in surrendering the illusion of perfect control, a psychological paradox where freedom is found not in maximizing agency, but in minimizing responsibility for the unmanageable. We are culturally indoctrinated to equate control with safety and virtue. The modern imperative demands that you optimize, hustle, and strategize until every single variable of your existence bends to your will. But what if the relentless, anxious pursuit of total control, the frantic belief that you must steer every outcome, is the single greatest source of contemporary anguish? This paradox explores the deep psychological liberation inherent in acknowledging radical determinism in macro events. It is not apathy, it is the strategic, almost meditative divestment from accountability for outcomes fundamentally beyond your grasp, whether those outcomes involve the actions of other people, global economic shifts, or sheer cosmic probability. It is the moment where stoic acceptance transforms into gentle, necessary resignation. Imagine you are a meticulous ship captain guiding a perfectly charted vessel into a sudden, violent tempest. You've calculated the currents, inspected the rigging, and prepared for heavy weather, yet the storm that strikes is apocalyptic. The waves are mountainous, and the gale-force winds laugh at your carefully drawn geometry. The captain who fights to maintain the exact pre-planned vector risks wrecking the ship through sheer exhaustion and misplaced effort. The truly wise captain, however, takes the helm not to control the storm, a fool's errand, but to merely respond to the immediate shifting conditions. They utilize the minimal agency left to keep the hull intact, letting the vessel ride the swells, knowing that the timing and the exact destination are now facts of nature. The failure to reach the port on time is no longer a personal failing, but a meteorological inevitability. The comfort arrives when you realize the storm decided the schedule, not you. Why is this surrender so psychologically soothing? Because control demands immense draining energy, and the subsequent failure to control inevitably demands self-flagellation. If you accept that macro events, the tempest of the outside world, are fundamentally outside your defined circle of influence, you instantly shrink your sphere of moral and existential responsibility down to only your micro reactions. You trade the crippling burden of supposed omnipotence for the focused effectiveness of limited present moment action. We are creatures that crave the illusion of autonomy, yet we simultaneously dread the crushing accountability that comes hand in hand with it. The paradox here is elegant. Surrendering the illusion of global control grants you deeper, more focused, and highly sustainable control over your internal state. The anxiety doesn't vanish, but its source shifts from external failure, I didn't achieve X, to internal mismanagement, I didn't handle the failure well. Look at your life right now. Are you losing sleep over a job rejection, a relationship that, despite your best efforts, simply refused to harmonize, or perhaps a professional setback caused by forces entirely external to your work ethic? These are the inevitable tempests of the modern age. We've been trained to believe that if we just hustle harder, optimize more aggressively, research more exhaustively, and apply sufficient force, we can guarantee the desired outcome. This relentless expectation is brutalizing. The comfort of having no real control is the psychological soft landing that allows you to say genuinely, I executed my due diligence, I applied my best effort. The remaining 90% belong to the universe, and the universe chose otherwise. This realization serves as the ultimate anti-perfectionist manifesto. The profound psychological shift enabled by this acceptance is the radical redefinition of success. Success is no longer defined by the achieved result, which is contaminated and determined by countless external variables, but entirely by the quality of your internal process. Did you act ethically? Did you try sincerely and intelligently? If the answer is yes, then the lack of control over the ultimate outcome becomes irrelevant to your essential self-worth. You migrate from being an outcome-based human, forever hostage to chance, to an intention-based human, resilient and grounded. This acceptance is not passive. It is the foundational layer of deep, sustainable resilience. When you stop trying to wrestle the ocean, you finally learn how to float. The absence of total control is not a tragedy. It is an open invitation to rest. 12. The Screenplay. Written by my mistakes. The retroactive scriptwriter. Have you ever felt that the biggest, most agonizing failure of your life was also the most absolutely necessary step? Relax your shoulders. Breathe into that heavy, unsettling realization. What if the error you fought so hard to avoid wasn't a detour or a tragic divergence, but the only mathematically possible way forward into the self you are today? We are talking now about the necessity of error. This is a concept far deeper than the motivational poster cliché about learning from your mistakes. This is the more brutal, more unsettling recognition that certain outcomes, the specific successes, the unique vantage points, the exact understanding you hold right now, required the specific gravitational pull of those past misjudgments. The singular path you are standing upon is not defined in spite of the mistakes you made, but fundamentally because of them. We are forced to confront the idea that the script of your life was written backward, that the ending demanded the flawed, messy, deeply human journey you took. Imagine a highly skilled cinematic editor trying to cut together a masterpiece. Initially, the editor attempts to remove every stutter, every awkward silence, every moment where the lead actor fumbled the prop. But slowly, the editor realizes that the jarring, accidental shot, the moment the camera slipped, the line was improvised under stress, the failure was painfully obvious, is precisely what lends the finished scene its raw, undeniable authenticity. It gives the narrative its teeth. Your life is that film. Every single time you deviated violently from the perfect, planned, 5-year script you thought you were following, you were not ruining the narrative. You were creating the only true, unedited, meaningful version of it. The slip of the tongue that cost you a critical job led you to the city where you met the essential person. The catastrophic investment failure forced a humility and resourcefulness you desperately needed. The relationship that imploded taught you the limits of your own boundaries. These were not mistakes to be fixed. They were scene settings. Here is where the paradox hits you with the full force of existential irony. We exercise free will to choose X instead of Y. We commit fully to X, and in the short term, we fail horribly. In that immediate moment of wreckage, we feel the intense, immediate weight of responsibility. I chose this wrong path. I messed up. But fast forward 5 years. The path X, though initially laden with failure and regret, has now educated you, connected you to unusual allies, or redirected you entirely to a unique, unexpected vantage point. Now looking back, you desperately try to imagine the success of path Y. You try to conjure the version of yourself who never failed, and you realize, with a cold certainty, that choosing Y would have led to a less interesting, a less resilient, perhaps a fundamentally shallower existence. The core paradox is this: your free will choice, initially and immediately judged as a mistake, retroactively solidifies and appears to be an integral, essential piece of destiny. We choose our own necessity. The tension rests purely in the timing. We feel completely free when we are in the act of choosing, but we feel fundamentally destined, obligated, and trapped when we look back and trace the causal chain. It is the inescapable illusion of the rewind button. You cannot go back and fix the error without fundamentally erasing the unique, hardened, compassionate self that exists right now. Think about the current anxiety binding you. You are worried sick about the next choice, the potential for failure looming large. But this perspective demands a radical acceptance. Stop treating your past mistakes as permanent, damning evidence of your incompetence, and start viewing them as the foundational, necessary concrete of your current identity. If you could press a button and cleanly erase that specific mistake from history, you wouldn't just erase the negative short-term outcome. You would simultaneously erase the subsequent learning, the specific scar tissue, the nuanced understanding, and the quiet resilience that defines how you navigate this very minute. Your errors are not glitches in the system of your life. They are essential features of your current operating system. The psychological impact of embracing the necessity of error is a profound, almost revolutionary liberation. It shifts the burden of forced perfection away from your shoulders. It transforms regret from a punitive mechanism, a stick to beat yourself with, into a gentle, accepting confirmation. I am exactly where I needed to be to finally understand this. This view collapses the tension between deterministic fate and libertarian free will into a powerful synthesis. We are free to choose, but the path created by those choices, regardless of how messy, gains an undeniable retrospective inevitability. You were destined to become the specific person who made that specific mistake. So, let the past breathe. Stop desperately trying to edit the screenplay of your life for mistakes and errors. Every plot hole, every awkward jump cut, every character failing, it was the only way to write the complex, profound, and unique ending you are living right now. The greatest act of free will you possess is simply accepting that your destiny was written entirely in the indelible ink of your own unavoidable errors. The definition of the self as historical accident. The paradox of the contingent self. You believe in your core identity, that foundational, immutable essence that makes you you. You feel the weight of your choices defining your trajectory. But what if that core is merely the residue of a cosmic dice roll that landed on this specific time, this specific geography, and this specific confluence of ancestral luck? Take a deep breath. Let the beautiful, unsettling weight of that possibility settle softly on your chest. This concept, the definition of the self as historical accident, is perhaps the most challenging to our innate sense of control. It directly assaults the deeply rooted human assumption of essentialism, the belief that there is an unchanging, singular you waiting to be discovered or fulfilled. The historical accident theory posits that your personality profile, the languages you speak, the anxieties you carry, your very capacity for joy, and even the moral framework you employ are not divinely ordained attributes, but rather highly specific responses molded by environmental pressures that happen to converge precisely on your moment of birth. If your family had moved 2 streets over, if a specific political regime had failed 5 years earlier, or if your ancestors had chosen a different ship 100 years ago, the architecture of your consciousness would be fundamentally different. We are, philosophically speaking, the accumulation of vast happenstance granted temporary coherence. Your favorite color, your greatest fear, your financial prospects, all were determined by variables you had zero input in setting. Imagine the universe as an impossibly vast, infinite library containing every possible iteration of human life, stored as separate books. Most people navigate life believing their book was pre-selected for them by destiny or meticulously handwritten page by page by their own conscious choices. The historical accident theory suggests something far more chaotic. Your book was not written, it was assembled by a sudden, massive gust of cosmic wind. That wind ripped pages from hundreds of volumes titled Opportunities, Genetics, Cultural Norms, and Economic Climate, binding them randomly into the specific volume labeled Your Life. Every chapter you read, every character trait you claim, originated from a discarded scrap of contingency. You are the specific, messy binding of those random, torn pages, given the temporary illusion of wholeness. This leads to the central paradox of agency. If my self is built upon this mountain of accidental variables, where does my genuine free will reside? Here is the tension. We simultaneously live as if our choices are supreme, and yet, the very tools we use to make those choices, our capacity for reason, our deep-seated values, our very ability to recognize a moral dilemma, were supplied by the accident itself. We did not choose our brain chemistry, our social exposure, or the educational system that taught us how to think. The paradox is that this contingent self must, nonetheless, choose its future. You are a self-driving vehicle constructed entirely out of driftwood salvaged from a shipwreck, illogical, fragile, yet somehow required to navigate the high-speed highway of modern existence. The greatest accident of all is that this accidental collection of traits achieved self-awareness and began demanding meaning and purpose. How does this apply to your current moment, perhaps as you lie awake, contemplating regret or ambition? When you feel sharp envy for another person's seemingly perfect trajectory or blinding pride in your own accomplishments, remember the sheer luck of your starting line, your current career, your social circle, your core political beliefs. They feel utterly inevitable now, but they are monuments built on shifting, accidental sand. This insight creates the foundation for 2 crucial psychological states: radical humility and radical empathy. Radical humility because your success, talent, and advantages are not purely meritocratic. They are subsidized by random historical advantages. Radical empathy because the suffering and limitations of others are equally accidental, equally unchosen in their foundation. They too were victims of a different, harsher gust of wind. The profound psychological impact of accepting the self as contingent is liberation from the pressure of absolute essentialism. You don't have to spend a lifetime searching for the one true hidden you, because there isn't one. The you that exists right now is simply the most interesting, complex, and viable iteration that history, biology, and environment allowed to flourish. This recognition turns self-guilt into deep curiosity. If I am the historical accident, then I am not bound by some eternal script. I am constantly editable. The boundaries of the self become fluid, defined not by what history decreed you must be, but by what this specific configuration chooses to become, utilizing the very tools history accidentally provided for the journey ahead. The self is not a sculpture waiting to be unveiled. It is the footprint left by history, and tonight you decide where that footprint takes the next step. Sleep well, knowing you are a miraculous statistical improbability, a transient, beautiful pattern in the great, indifferent flow of time. The moment when willpower becomes fate. We arrive now at the concept of the law of terminal velocity for intent. It is the critical, often silent boundary where accumulated willpower ceases to be a force of change and becomes, instead, the fixed geometry of what must occur next. Have you ever felt the precise, terrifying instant when a choice stopped being reversible? When the energy you invested transitioned from a mere action into the immutable, defining history of who you fundamentally are? We tend to imagine free will as a continuous, effortless stream of potentiality, where every dawn resets the board. But this is the delusion of the uncommitted. True existence, the life of depth and consequence, operates differently. There exists a critical threshold, a point of no return for effort, where your persistent choices exert such a profound, self-created gravitational pull that they inevitably define the trajectory forward, functionally eliminating all other futures. This is not determinism imposed by the indifferent universe. This is determinism exquisitely and powerfully self-imposed by unwavering will. This is the fate we write when we refuse to stop writing. Consider the deep-sea diver, our central illustration for this boundary condition. When she first submerges, every meter is a conscious choice. She can turn back, ascend, and the physical consequences are minimal. But as she commits further, deeper, longer, the physical laws begin to rewrite her itinerary. The nitrogen saturates her tissues. If she reaches a certain depth and duration, the ascent is no longer an optional choice defined by freedom. It is a rigid, mandatory physiological necessity defined by the required decompression schedule. The initial free choice, to dive, has now manufactured an undeniable, required fate, the mandatory pauses on the way up. Her willpower initiated the process, but the accumulation of that intent locked her into a fixed schedule. This is the ultimate paradox of human autonomy, the maximum expression of your freedom, maximal, unwavering commitment to a single path, results in the immediate and profound reduction of your future freedom. You are never more powerful than when you choose irrevocably, yet that choice is the very thing that binds you forever after. This is why we carry such anxiety around major decisions. We are not worried about the choice itself, but about stepping across that threshold where responsibility demands accountability not just for the action taken, but for the entire ensuing narrative, for the self that choice molds you into. In your present life, you feel this mechanism in every area requiring genuine sacrifice. Think of long-term professional specialization, or a committed relationship built over decades, or even the careful tending of a complicated family legacy. Initially, it was a decision. You could quit, you could sever ties, you could move across the country. But after years of investment, shared identity, sacrifice, and the reorganization of your entire life structure around that initial choice, the daily question ceases to be, should I continue? It transforms into the existential dilemma, how can I not? How can I dismantle the mountain I have spent my entire adult life building? Your past dedication has solidified into the most powerful determining force shaping your present and defining your future. Recognizing this terminal velocity of intent radically shifts how we perceive destiny. Destiny is not some dusty cosmic script written before you were born and held by the stars. Destiny is the colossal, inevitable shadow cast by the monumental edifice of your own accumulated choices. If you believe your fate is fixed and unchangeable, look closely. You are likely gazing at the result of your own past, deeply rooted willpower that refuses to be undone. The true struggle to change your fate is not with external chains, but with the incredibly durable, self-forged commitments that you meticulously designed and built to anchor yourself to the world. The ultimate breathtaking paradox of free will is that we only truly use it once, fully, at the beginning of a major trajectory. And then, for the rest of our time, we live inside the fate that singular, irrevocable moment of committed choice created. We become passengers in the vessel we insisted upon building, navigating the waters we insisted upon reaching. The map that alters the terrain. Do you ever look at the plans you made for your life, the meticulous itineraries, the career trajectories, the defined milestones, and wonder if those plans are guiding you or demanding you? Are you simply following the script, or has the mere existence of the script forced you into a performance? The concept we often wrestle with is the map that alters the terrain. We frequently hear the philosophical axiom that the map is not the territory. It is a necessary abstraction, a useful reduction that allows us to navigate complex reality without being overwhelmed by every single data point. But what happens when the map you carry stops being descriptive and becomes relentlessly prescriptive? This is the core of cognitive determinism, the idea that our detailed mental models, our settled blueprints of the future, can exert a gravitational pull so strong they subtly distort and reshape the very landscape they were meant only to chart. Imagine an ancient, precise cartographer commissioned to document a vast, winding river valley. He spends years noting every stream, every elevation, every subtle bend. But as he gazes upon his finished parchment, he sees not the valley as it is, but the valley as it should be, according to the mathematical symmetry of his perfect lines. Driven by this intellectual ideal, the sense of rightness inherent in his own design, he spends the next decade diverting rivers, leveling hills, and planting forests. He is operating under the profound illusion that his work is merely reflecting reality, when in truth, he is forcing the territory to obey the template he drew. The map was initially a representation, but through the sheer weight of belief and action, it became the mandatory, unforgiving template for reality itself. This mechanism reveals the subtle theft of free will. You create a map of your future, your career trajectory, your ideal partner, the precise emotional state you believe will equal happiness. This map is built on logic, desire, past successes, and sometimes past trauma. You feel profoundly free in the act of creating it. Yet the moment the map is complete and bound, it stops being a flexible tool and starts acting as a silent, invisible prison guard. When the actual territory of your life throws up an unexpected hill, a new, unplanned opportunity, a radically different kind of love, an insight that invalidates your existing goals, your internal engine rejects it. Not because the new feature is wrong or bad, but because it doesn't fit the scale or the legend of your existing chart. You are no longer navigating. You are perpetually correcting reality, burning precious life energy not on living, but on pruning and shaping the messy, organic world back into the sterile, predictable lines of your map. Think about the intense, detailed planning demanded by modern life. The 5-year plans, the financial projections, the relentless vision boarding that insists on absolute clarity of ambition. We are taught to believe absolutely in the power of intention, but sometimes intention hardens into inflexible dogma. We mistake the rigidity of the map for the stability of the destination. We become so singularly focused on fulfilling the narrative we wrote about who we are supposed to be that we miss the profound, messy beauty of who we actually are becoming in the moment. We deny the right of the living territory to surprise us, to challenge our assumptions, or to offer a path far more interesting than the one we pre-selected in the quiet comfort of our minds. The deeper philosophical impact of this paradox lies in realizing that we often choose the safety of known limitations over the terrifying freedom of boundless potential. The map offers profound existential security. It eliminates the burden of continuous moment-to-moment choice by pre-selecting the route and validating every step forward. But the price paid is authenticity. We end up existing in a state of continuous emotional and behavioral editing, perpetually deleting data points from reality that contradict our internal blueprint. True destiny, the one that accommodates genuine growth, might only be accessible when you intentionally choose to blur the lines on your internal map, allowing the messy, unpredictable territory to reclaim its right to surprise and redefine you. Are you merely a traveler observing the spontaneous landscape, or are you the architect under constant surveillance by your own blueprint? Perhaps true sovereign destiny is not the destination you plotted in the quiet of your youth, but the courage to tear up the parchment entirely and navigate by the unexpected stars the living territory already offers. We're halfway through this journey. Maybe you've closed your eyes, but your mind is still learning. Subscribe now and stay with us for what's coming next. The silence before the irreversible dawn, the paradox of retrospective determinism. Have you ever felt that intense, suffocating stillness right after you made a monumental decision? That moment where the world stops spinning and you realize every other possible timeline just evaporated? That silence before the irreversible dawn is not merely a pause. It is the sound of potentiality collapsing into fixed reality. Retrospective determinism isn't about looking backward and seeing a predictable chain of events. That is just historical observation. This is the profound psychological phenomenon where, immediately upon exercising free will, the chosen path instantly assumes the quality of destiny. Before the choice, everything was fluid potential, the air thick with what-ifs. After the choice, it instantly feels like the only way it could have ever been. It is the instantaneous conversion of choice into fate. This isn't a purely philosophical argument for actual determinism, but a clinical description of the emotional gravity that settles upon an irrevocable action. We don't just accept the consequence. We rewrite the preceding events to make the consequence necessary. To grasp this mechanism, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast, misty canyon, holding a single smooth stone. The air vibrates with pure possibility. You have the absolute, unburdened freedom to throw it left, right, or straight ahead. The potential paths are infinite. You choose. You throw it straight ahead, and it arcs down into the mist. In that very second the stone leaves your hand, the path it takes, that parabolic curve, is cemented. It cannot return. It is etched into reality. That curve, which was just milliseconds ago one of infinite potentials, is now the fixed, undeniable past. Your mind immediately interprets the path taken not as a choice, but as a necessity. The mist cleared for this specific flight. The trajectory was always meant to be this one. Why does this fundamental shift happen? Because potential requires agency, effort, and confrontation with exhausting uncertainty. Actualization, however, is comparatively cheap. It requires only acceptance. The paradox is that the very act of choosing freely is what ultimately destroys freedom. When you commit, you trade boundless possibility for singular reality. The silence before the irreversible dawn is that brief window where free will still breathes, heavy and uncertain. The dawn itself is the realization, I did this, and immediately following is the soothing internal whisper, this had to happen. We crave certainty, and our mind grants it, transforming the hard-won product of free will into a comforting narrative of inevitability, just to cope with the sheer terror of having closed so many doors. The tension lies precisely here. If my choice now feels inevitable, does that diminish the power of the free will I just used to make it? This feeling plagues us in every significant commitment. Moving cities, accepting a proposal, uttering those three life-altering words. We obsess over the what-ifs before the action, believing the struggle is the choice itself. But the deepest struggle often occurs in the immediate aftermath, when the ghost potential selves, the selves you abandoned, begin haunting the edges of your reality. Once the dawn breaks, you are no longer navigating a field of options, you are navigating consequence. The irreversible dawn demands that you learn to live solely with the self you chose to become. The psychological impact of retrospective determinism is profound because it functions as the mechanism of self-justification. If we truly acknowledge the chaotic randomness, the small, insignificant pivot that allowed us to choose path A over path B, the resulting regret or fear would be existentially paralyzing. So the mind quietly edits the script. It writes destiny into the background noise. This psychological determinism allows us to find peace in consequence, claiming that the journey, however painful, was necessary, inescapable, and vital. It shifts responsibility from the fragile ego of the chooser onto the vast, impersonal shoulders of fate. It is the ultimate intellectual defense mechanism against the crushing weight of true, unburdened free will. We use free will to forge the chains of destiny we then spend the rest of our lives trying to justify. Listen closely to the silence after the choice. It is the sound of a million possibilities dying, leaving behind only the cold, clear echo of the one reality you bravely or foolishly chose to keep. The burden of being the sole author. The burden of sole authorship, when absolute freedom becomes terror. You crave absolute control over the trajectory of your life, yet you secretly, deep down, pray for an outside, cosmic force to share the blame when things go wrong. Why does the promise of perfect, unadulterated freedom often feel less like liberation and more like spiritual isolation? This is not merely about responsibility. This is the philosophical extreme of radical existential freedom. It is the core realization that if there is no divine plan, no cosmic blueprint, no rigid genetic imperative dictating your path, then every silence, every missed opportunity, every failure you face is a direct consequence of a choice made entirely by you. It is the cold, unwavering certainty that the blank page of the future is truly blank, and the only ink in the pen is your own vital, finite energy. Consider the metaphor of the cosmic editor. Imagine you are handed the unbound manuscript of your life story and told, write it. You begin enthusiastically, crafting heroes and villains, plot twists and resolutions. But as you work, you realize something terrifying. There is no editor. There is no publisher, no review board, no literary agent capable of saying, this ending was tragic, but it was necessary for the overarching theme. There is no higher authority to validate or absolve your choices. When you choose a painful path, you look around for fate to whisper, it was unavoidable. But the room is empty. You chose the tragedy. You chose the pause. You chose the unforgiving, empty space between one chapter and the next. The paradox inherent in sole authorship is that true freedom demands isolation. To claim 100% ownership of your future means rejecting all co-authorship, the comforting scripts of society, the determinism of genetics, the soft pillow of divine fate. This level of freedom is simultaneously intoxicating because it grants boundless potential and utterly terrifying because it permanently removes the possibility of excuse. We dedicate enormous psychological energy throughout our lives to building elaborate narrative defenses, repeating phrases like, I had no choice, or I am a product of the system, precisely to avoid the monumental, crushing weight of realizing, I am the sole author of this outcome. The burden is the absolute 0 point of accountability. This realization applies acutely to the paralyzing anxiety that characterizes modern decision-making. Which career to pursue, which city to inhabit, which commitment to finalize. If you believe there is one predetermined right answer dictated by destiny, the pressure is manageable. You simply need to listen harder for the signal. But when you accept that there are infinite, equally valid paths, and the only metric for success is the one you personally invent and impose, the decision transforms into an existential crisis. The moment you commit to path A, you must mourn the infinite possibilities of paths B, C, and D, and you alone bear the weight of that required sacrifice. You are sacrificing potential futures onto the altar of your present commitment. Philosophically, this shift means you stop being merely a participant in a predefined play and become the architect of the stage, the playwright, the lead actor, and the audience, all simultaneously. This deep dive into soul authorship suggests that even the narratives you construct about your past failures are, in themselves, secondary choices. You chose the action, and then, immediately following, you chose the meaning you assigned to that action. This grants you the ultimate freedom, the freedom to define failure itself. But it is precisely this chilling power that often pushes us back toward the softer, warmer comfort of cosmic victimhood, where at least some of the ink on the page belongs to someone else. Stop looking for the hidden instructions that promise to guide your pen. Stop waiting for the validation of the silent cosmic editor. The only binding contracts you have signed are the ones you wrote in silence, in the margins of the future you simultaneously feared and chose. The burden of being the sole author is simply the recognition of your own tremendous weight in the universe. What the shadows already knew of tomorrow, the logic of inevitability, future contingents. You lie here, in the quiet space between today and tomorrow, believing that the decisions you will make once the sun crosses the horizon will be spontaneous, born purely from the untainted impulse of your own will. You believe you are free, but what if the truth of that choice, the specific truth value, is already fixed, written not by a celestial deity, but by the cold, relentless logic of the universe itself? Can true, pure freedom exist when the outcome of your action is already logically certain? This is the ancient philosophical knot tightened thousands of years ago, known as the problem of future contingents. A contingent statement is one that might be true or false. If I say, the earth is round, that is necessarily true. If I say, I will eat an apple tomorrow, that is contingent. The paradox arises when we apply the principle of benevolence, the rule that every declarative statement must be unequivocally either true or false. There is no middle ground. If we look at the statement, you will eat an apple tomorrow, it must possess a truth value right now. If it is already true that you will eat the apple, then the future event of eating the apple is inevitable. When tomorrow arrives, you are simply fulfilling a fixed, eternal truth. Conversely, if the statement is currently false, then you cannot possibly choose the apple later. Either way, your freedom seems to evaporate the moment logic applies its rigid framework. The shadows already know the truth value of the statements pertaining to your future, even if you do not yet know the outcome of your choices. Imagine the book of time, not as a mystical, prophetic scroll dictating events, but as an infinitely detailed ledger of factual statements. Tomorrow's precise moment of decision. You choose coffee over tea. This sentence exists now. It holds a permanent, unchangeable truth value. If it is true now that you will choose coffee, then the future action of drinking coffee is logically necessitated. To choose tea would require that the statement, you choose coffee over tea, was false, which contradicts the premise that it is currently true. The moment the statement acquires its eternal truth value, true or false, the window for genuine contingency, and perhaps genuine free will, closes. The tension this creates in the thinking mind is immense. Logic insists on bivalence. It demands certainty, even across the temporal gulf. To deny this logical fatalism, philosophers have historically been forced to deny the principle of bivalence itself for future events. To say that the statement, I will choose coffee, is currently neither true nor false, existing in a strange limbo state of mere potentiality. But this feels intellectually uncomfortable. It requires us to believe that the basic laws of logic take a temporary, strategic vacation, applying universally to the past and the present, but pausing their operation in the domain of the future, purely for the sake of preserving the human sensation of agency. We are asked to trade universal logical consistency for the subjective experience of freedom. We feel the heavy pressure of this logical framework constantly in moments of high consequence. When you finally decide to commit to a major life change, to move across the country, to dissolve a relationship, to fundamentally alter your career, the tension we feel is not just about the execution of the action. It is the psychological strain of collapsing possibility into concrete eternal fact. Once the decision is made, we often experience an immediate feeling of inevitability in retrospect. We say, "I always knew I was going to do this," or "it had to happen this way." This sense of retroactive certainty is us sensing the logical shadow of the truth we just activated. We are sensing the moment when the statement about our actions ceased being neither true nor false and snapped into absolute, undeniable true. Our deep-seated anxiety is the space between the present state of floating potential and the moment we choose to collapse the wave function of our choices into fixed historical fact. If we embrace logical fatalism, the burden of choice vanishes, replaced by the cold peace of acceptance, but we lose meaningful responsibility. If we deny it, we must accept that our universe is fundamentally strange and temporally inconsistent, logically messy in its deepest foundations, solely to accommodate the fragile existence of human choice. This paradox forces us to choose between an orderly, mathematically predictable cosmos, where we are merely performers, following a script written by logic, or a chaotic, truly spontaneous cosmos, where the laws of thought themselves are conditional. Perhaps freedom isn't the ability to make an uncaused choice, but the agonizing responsibility of being the only entity capable of turning a floating possibility into a concrete, eternal truth. The shadows knew what truth label was waiting. You were merely the one who affixed it. You are not choosing what happens, you are choosing what was always true. The space between the breath and the action, the gap of genuine choice, the space between the breath and the action. There is a silence deeper than the night, where you momentarily possess all paths and none of them. Where does your will truly reside in that infinitesimal slice of time? We define choice as a deliberate cognitive process. We weigh options, we calculate outcomes. But the most profound choices in your life, the ones that irrevocably shift your trajectory, rarely follow a logical flowchart. They occur in the neural microseconds just before the physical initiation of movement or speech. Philosophers, especially those focused on existentialism and neurological determinism, call this the veto window. It is the flickering burbs, unowned moment after the impulse to act has been generated by your subconscious brain, but before the conscious self commits the energy to motion. It is the purest nexus of the free will versus destiny debate. If the action is already decided by neurological processes, is that microsecond gap truly the final frontier of your freedom, or merely the illusion of final deliberation? This is the labyrinth of the pre-action moment, the most vital and most contested real estate in the architecture of yourself. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a great cliff. You are not contemplating jumping, you are contemplating stepping back from the edge. The impulse to lean forward might be purely biological, a momentary miscalculation of balance, a trick of the vertigo. Your body begins the lean. The decisive moment is not the intellectual assessment of risk, but the subsequent, immediate activation of the stabilizing muscles. The real choice isn't deciding to stabilize, it is the instantaneous acceptance or rejection of the initial precognitive momentum. It is the moment between the recognition of the drop and the firing of the necessary motor neurons to stop it. What controls that firing? Is it the I you recognize or the deeply layered protective programs of the universe running through your nervous system? That instant is not merely quick, it is absolute. Once the stabilization process is underway, the choice is already over. This space is paradoxical because it must exist to validate free will, yet its existence seems to prove determinism. Neurology shows that readiness potential, the brain activity leading to movement, occurs hundreds of milliseconds before you are consciously aware of deciding to act. This suggests the action is already slated for execution by the immense, non-conscious engine that runs your life. Yet there is a subsequent, smaller neurological window where the conscious mind, the observer, can still interrupt or abort that action. This is the veto. But where does the veto come from? If the initial impulse was determined by genetics, environment, and past experience, is the subsequent veto not also determined by the same complex causal chain? You are free to choose, but the choice to choose, or the choice to veto the determined action, must itself be determined by something. The paradox is absolute. If the gap is real, where is the origin point of the counter-impulse? If the origin point is also a causality, then the gap collapses, and choice remains an elaborate form of theatrical delay, staged solely for your internal audience. This constant, subtle battle defines your anxiety in daily life. Every time you hesitate before sending a harsh email, or pause before yielding to a habit you know is destructive, you are operating within that critical veto window. You experience the internal struggle not as a philosophical problem, but as palpable tension. The breath catches, the shoulders tighten, the stomach clenches. The modern world is engineered to minimize this space. Notifications demand immediate attention. Fast food demands immediate consumption. Digital media demands immediate reaction. We are trained to collapse the gap, to eliminate the silence where genuine, often painful choice must take root. To reclaim your agency is to aggressively protect and expand that tiny, fragile space, cultivating the stillness required to deploy the veto before the neural momentum becomes unstoppable action. Recognizing this gap changes how you view responsibility. If you accept that the initial urge is often the product of impersonal forces, trauma, conditioning, biology, then genuine moral agency shifts entirely to the veto power. Responsibility isn't about controlling the first thought. It's about tending the space after the first thought. This realization grants tremendous peace. You are not defined by the impulsive, determined thought that arises, but by the conscious decision to let the determined impulse pass without manifestation. It frees you from the tyranny of the subconscious first draft. You become the editor, not the author, of your immediate actions. You are granted the immense silent power of non-participation in the inevitable. The ultimate freedom is not the power to initiate, but the divine, terrifying power to withhold. In that space between the breath and the action, you are the universe deciding whether or not to repeat its last mistake. The futility of planning the unpredictable. The Cassandra condition, when foresight becomes constraint. We spend half our lives charting maps for landscapes that cease to exist the moment the pen leaves the paper. We invest enormous psychological energy into engineering a future that is structurally resistant to the very forces of chance and change that define existence. Doesn't that quiet urgency, that feeling of being perpetually behind the curve of your own intentions, ever exhaust you? We carry the weight of detailed blueprints, convinced that the sheer volume of planning equals immunity from the unpredictable. This paradox sits squarely at the intersection of strategic thinking and epistemological humility. Planning, by definition, is the imposition of rational order onto probable future states. We try to predict the waves by measuring the tide, but the universe doesn't operate solely on predictable probability. It operates on instantaneous, overwhelming occurrence. We confuse the utility of planning, which mainly serves to reduce our present anxiety, with its actual efficacy in guaranteeing desired outcomes. The sophisticated planner, the one who meticulously believes they have anticipated 99 variables, is often the most vulnerable when the one truly unforeseen variable, the black swan, materializes, because their framework lacks the capacity for radical revision. Consider the concept of the eternal second move. Imagine you are engaged in a complex game of chess against a truly sentient opponent. You plan 10 moves ahead, meticulously calculating every counter and sacrifice. But the opponent, being the mechanism of destiny itself, doesn't just react to your move. It subtly rewrites the fundamental rules of the board after your move is executed. You are always playing the second move in a game defined by the first move you can never truly anticipate. Your strategy might be mathematically flawless, but its foundation is perpetually shifting sand. You are fighting the memory of the game, not the reality of the game unfolding now. The core conflict isn't between planning and spontaneity, it's between the closed system of the meticulously detailed plan and the open system of reality. Every single choice we make introduces exponentially more variables that were outside the boundary of the original spreadsheet. We might plan our career trajectory for 5 years, but we cannot plan the market collapse, the chance encounter, or the profound, perspective-altering grief that rearranges all priorities in a single afternoon. The detailed plan offers a psychological safety net, a temporary reprieve from chaos, but it simultaneously blinds us to emergent opportunities that lie outside its strict boundaries. We become fiercely loyal to the map rather than the territory it represents. The deeper you anchor your future in a fixed plan, the smaller the aperture through which true transformative destiny can enter. The very act of over-planning, of seeking to control every contingency, becomes the profound constraint that prevents the discovery of a better, unforeseen path. We use our detailed foresight not as a guide, but as a cage. Think about your digital life, the constant stream of optimization. How much of your calendar is dedicated to fine-tuning a future you might not even want by the time next quarter rolls around? We schedule spontaneity, we plan our rest, we blueprint our personal growth, treating life entirely as a project to be managed, quantified, and conquered. This frantic optimization, this constant battle against the simple state of being, leaves us drained, not prepared. We are managing the clock with extreme efficiency, but we are completely ignoring the intrinsic rhythm of our own existence. The profound philosophical and psychological impact arrives with this realization. True preparation is not the meticulous detailing of paths A, B, and C. True preparation is the cultivation of internal resilience, the cognitive flexibility to discard 10 years of strategy in 10 seconds, and the radical acceptance of irreducible uncertainty. When we finally relinquish the illusion of control over the outcome, we gain profound, immediate control over our response. We stop grieving the structural collapse of Plan A and immediately engage with the completely new reality that has emerged. This shift transforms planning from a heavy burden of predictive perfection into a lightweight tool for initial orientation. We trade brittle control for adaptive mastery. The great irony of our existence is that sometimes the only way to truly secure the future is to hold our current plans loosely enough to let the universe surprise us with something better. Destiny isn't found on the schedule, it is always and only found in the pivot. If knowing the end requires the middle, you often crave the finished canvas, the certainty of the final scene, the clear assurance that all your current struggle resolves into something meaningful. We yearn for the spoiler, the guarantee of success, the pre-read last page of the novel. But if I handed you that last page right now, would you truly know the story, or would you merely possess a piece of inert information, a conclusion stripped of the contextual meaning that only the middle pages, the effort, the confusion, the mistakes, can provide? This is the paradox of necessary sequence. If knowing the end requires the middle, then pure foresight is functionally impossible. We operate under the assumption that destiny, if it exists, is a destination preset on a GPS, a fixed coordinate we are marching toward. But destiny is not just the coordinate, it is the algorithmic necessity of every turn, every delay, every moment of choosing to recalculate. The endpoint does not exist in a vacuum. It is the cumulative result of all the nows that precede it, validated only by the integrity of the path taken. Imagine you are an engineer designing an immense, complex suspension bridge spanning a vast, turbulent gorge. You hold the blueprint of the finished span, the perfect arc, the flawless connection of the two sides. That beautiful, stable crossing is the end. But the knowledge of the bridge's existence is absolutely useless unless you understand the tensile strength required, the hundreds of miles of cable needed, the precise geometry of every tower, the specific techniques for anchoring the foundation into unstable bedrock, the immense and often tedious middle. If you attempt to skip a single foundational calculation, the known end collapses into the water, proving that your knowledge of the outcome was incomplete or conditional from the start. Here is the central conflict. If destiny is truly fixed, our actions risk feeling superfluous. Why try if the outcome is assured? Yet the mechanism of destiny is the performance of those actions. You cannot have the result without the equation. The knowledge of the end, paradoxically, doesn't negate the struggle. It defines the struggle as absolutely necessary. The only way to ensure the known end manifests is to execute the middle with unflinching precision. The illusion is believing that the future is a static object that simply awaits you, rather than a dynamic system that requires your active participation to be constructed. If you saw your inevitable victory and then chose to stop trying based on that certainty, the outcome changes instantly. The failure proves that your initial knowledge of the inevitable end was flawed because it neglected the fundamental prerequisite, the middle. Think about the skills you deeply desire to master in your life right now, whether it is a complex professional expertise, learning a difficult language, or achieving a deep, abiding emotional resilience. You can clearly visualize the fluent speaker, the master craftsman, the calm individual who handles crisis with grace, the end. But if you only possess the mental image of the perfected performance, would you truly possess the skill? No. The smooth sound of fluency requires the 1,000 hours of embarrassing mispronunciations, the frustrating grammatical mistakes, the repetitive drills that feel pointless. Your destined competence is contingent entirely upon the present and often tedious act of practice. The mastery is built step by step, it is not bestowed whole. This realization forces a profound psychological shift. We are conditioned to treat the journey as merely an obstacle to the destination. We grit our teeth and wait for the journey to be over. But when we accept the paradox of necessary sequence, we start seeing the journey as the destination, the only part of the entire equation we truly inhabit and influence. Your peace, your true philosophical calm, comes from recognizing that the integrity of the end is entirely dependent on the integrity of your presence in the middle. You are not waiting for the outcome. You are, brick by brick, moment by moment, forging it. Maybe the deepest truth is this. True knowledge of the end is only acquired after you have lived through the middle. You cannot cheat the sequence. You must become the architecture of your own outcome. The rebellion that solidifies the system, the paradox of controlled resistance. Have you ever felt, in the quiet hours just before sleep, that your most profound act of defiance, the decision you believed was purely your own, was merely a planned variation within the larger script you desperately tried to escape? We are diving now into the ultimate irony of free will, the rebellion that does not dismantle the system, but solidifies it. We are defining the concept where the moment your choice is predicated entirely on rejecting the established norm, that rejection itself becomes a predictable, necessary counterweight, reinforcing the architecture of the very structure you fight. This is not simply conformity. This is the structure anticipating, internalizing, and ultimately metabolizing dissent. Consider the metaphor of the master architect who designs a monumental system, a seamless network of roads and rules. Everyone is meant to follow path A, the path of certainty and stability, but the architect knows that the human spirit rebels against certainty. A system without resistance is a brittle system. Therefore, the architect deliberately installs path B, the exit strategy, the path of the rebel. Path B looks dangerous, it feels independent, it demands sacrifice. It is precisely through the existence and constant visibility of path B that the architect legitimizes path A. The people who choose path A do so not because they are forced, but because they have consciously rejected the inherent difficulties of the alternative. The existence of the escape route proves the strength and value of staying put. This is the central illustration of the labyrinth and the rebel mouse. The walls seem insurmountable, leading to deep frustration. The mouse, driven by pure revolutionary spirit, digs an escape tunnel. It triumphs, feeling the cool air of freedom on its whiskers. Yet, what the mouse failed to realize is that the engineers who built the maze had already poured the foundation, knowing that any good maze requires secondary escape routes. These routes, often disguised as spontaneous departures, are necessary pressure release valves that prevent explosive collapse. They lead the rebel not truly outside, but merely into a secondary, isolated chamber, confirming the maze's boundaries and reassuring the inhabitants still following Path A that rebellion is a contained phenomenon, ultimately controllable and irrelevant to the main trajectory. The rebellion acts as a necessary sacrifice, defining the system's limits without threatening its core. The tension within this paradox lies in the realization that the main path gains its definition, its gravity, its legitimacy, precisely from the existence of the marginalized alternative. Without the existence of the true rebel, the system has no authority to defend, no standard against which to measure its stability. The system is not brittle, it is fractal. Your departure is simply the creation of a new internal boundary, a new subcategory that the whole can encompass. Your attempt to define yourself by negation ultimately defines the thing you negate even more strongly. Apply this mechanism to modern life. You reject the monotony of corporate existence. You quit your job, embrace the aesthetic of the counterculture, prioritizing freedom over stability. But within months, your unique rebellious lifestyle, the artisanal coffee, the minimalist wardrobe, the nomadic existence, has been neatly packaged, assigned a price point, and filed under Lifestyle Option C. The same market forces you rejected absorb your dissent, commodifying your freedom and selling it back to the next generation of potential rebels. Your singular, authentic choice became inventory. Your attempt to escape the structure merely defined a new niche within the market structure itself. The resulting philosophical dread forces us to ask, is true unabsorbed rebellion possible? If every exit is pre-marked and every deviation is accounted for, does genuine freedom lie not in external action, but in recognizing the bounds, not fighting them, but simply choosing which labeled boundary you inhabit with full conscious intent? This realization shifts the battlefield from the outside world to the internal motive. Did you choose the rebellion because it was truly your sovereign will, or did the rebellion choose you because the system required a designated antagonist to maintain its equilibrium? The deepest insight is terrifying. You may be the dedicated antagonist required by destiny, the crucial counterpoint that keeps the entire symphony from dissolving into noise. Your struggle is not pointless, it is essential, but perhaps essential to the very order you despise. When you finally break free, check the label on the chain you dropped. It may have been a limited edition product specifically designed for the escape. The illusion of the unpaved road. The illusion of the unpaved road. This is the paradox of choosing a harder path only to realize the destination was fixed all along. Have you ever intentionally taken the difficult route, the winding track overgrown with weeds, believing that the struggle was proof of your freedom? What if the intense, deliberate effort to deviate was the mandatory detour programmed into the GPS of your life? We fetishize the unpaved road. It represents authenticity, defiance against convention, and the raw expression of our autonomous will. We reject the clean, efficient four-lane highway because it feels too linear, too convenient, too fated. We believe that if we choose the path of most resistance, we are actively escaping determinism. The unpaved road is our psychological safety net, assuring us, through scraped knees and deep exhaustion, that we are the sole authors of our effort and therefore our outcome. This concept is not about physical geography, it is about the deliberate embrace of complexity, in career shifts, in choosing difficult partners, or in the painful process of personal growth, specifically to assert the existence of radical, unfettered free will. Imagine a vast, dense forest. The paved road, smooth and direct, cuts straight through, leading directly to the town of fulfillment. But you, dedicated to your own sovereignty, choose to enter the forest, hacksaw in hand, carving out a difficult switchback trail where no path previously existed. You spend decades battling the thorns and the mud, believing every blister is a victory against the system. You finally break through the tree line, exhausted, profoundly proud of the unique journey you survived. You look up, and there, 50 yards away, is the paved road, and the weathered signpost clearly indicates you are standing in the exact same town of fulfillment that you would have reached in an hour if you had simply followed the asphalt. Your path was spectacularly different. Your endpoint was undeniably identical. This is where the tension resides. The unpaved road doesn't negate destiny. It merely personalizes the journey. The effort was real. The pain was genuine. The choices made moment to moment were undeniably yours. But perhaps the necessary outcome was simply a function of your deepest underlying traits and the gravitational forces already in motion. The paradox is that the illusion of the unpaved road is fundamentally crucial for human motivation. If you knew the exact destination was fixed, would you still undertake the difficult walk? The mechanism is subtle. Destiny might prescribe the goal, but free will dictates the scenery and the velocity of your movement through it. We confuse the sheer difficulty of the scenery with the true flexibility of the goal. We confuse agency, the inherent ability to act and execute, with autonomy, the true ability to choose a fundamentally divergent ultimate outcome. We often confuse self-sabotage or unnecessary delay with radical individuality. Sometimes the unpaved road is not a testament to freedom. It is merely a manifestation of resistance. Resistance not to the world's demands, but resistance to the self you were already destined to become. Look closely at your current struggles, that relationship you are agonizing over. Believing every argument is a radical choice that fundamentally determines your fate, or that career pivot you are fighting tooth and nail for, enduring massive risk and discomfort. Are you making these agonizing choices because they genuinely lead to a unique endpoint unavailable to others, or because your internal narrative demands that the path feel uniquely earned and therefore valuable? In the modern context, the unpaved road is often the rejection of easy success. We distrust things that come readily, automatically labeling them as less meaningful. If you succeed too quickly, society suspects luck or privilege. If you crawl your way through struggle, we grant you heroism. We choose the unpaved road not for the destination's clarity, but for the validation inherent in the suffering itself. Accepting the illusion of the unpaved road forces a profound psychological shift. It immediately liberates you from the unnecessary burden of believing every piece of grit and struggle proves your cosmic significance. If the destination is truly inevitable, your focus shifts drastically from the desperate task of achieving the outcome to the meditative act of experiencing the journey with deeper presence. The walk stops being a grueling test of will against fate and becomes, instead, a profound exploration of how your inherent destiny unfolds through the stream of your conscious choices. You stop fighting the river just to prove you can swim upstream, and instead you learn how to master the currents that were always moving you toward the sea. The deepest psychological relief comes from the realization that sometimes the most authentic choice is the one that is also the easiest, because it aligns perfectly with the path that was always meant for you to walk. Perhaps true freedom is not found in choosing the unpaved road, but in finally recognizing that the pavement beneath your feet was always composed entirely of the choices you insisted on making. The destination does not care how long it took you to arrive, only that you finally did. The act of waiting as a form of choosing, the calculus of stillness, when delay becomes consent. You believe waiting is merely empty space, a required pause between stimulus and result, a neutral allocation of time you are forced to endure. But what if that stillness, that mandated inaction, is actually the heaviest, most demanding decision you can make? We commonly define waiting as the complete surrender of agency, a passive state controlled entirely by external factors. The bus hasn't arrived, the phone hasn't rung, the necessary condition hasn't been met. We cast ourselves as spectators in the drama of our own lives. Philosophically, however, every moment spent waiting is a moment where you choose not to alter the environment, not to change the path, and not to abandon the hope tethered to the delayed event. You are not idle. You are actively choosing to preserve the potential outcome by dedicating your present self to its arrival. Imagine standing before a massive locked door. You have been told, perhaps by fate, perhaps by circumstance, that behind it lies your defining opportunity, but you must wait until the time is right. The true paradox isn't that the door is locked. The paradox is the sustained presence you maintain before it. Every second you don't turn around and seek another entrance, every minute you don't use your energy to smash the lock or walk away, is an explicit, conscious choice. You are endorsing the value of what lies behind that specific door, choosing it over every other possibility, every open field, and every alternate path behind you. You are choosing the wait itself. The mind resists this interpretation because accepting waiting as an active choice instantly imposes accountability. If you are choosing to wait, then the eventual failure of the event, or the wasted potential of the intervening time, becomes partly your burden to carry. This is the core tension. Passive waiting feels safe because the fault and the failure lie externally, with the delay. Active choosing means accepting the inherent risk of wasted time, the risk of betting your limited temporal resources on a probability. You are not just idling until the future arrives, you are investing the present in a single projected outcome. The decision is not truly if the event will happen, but how long you will allow your current life to be dictated by its shadow. Think of all the small, debilitating waits in your modern life. Waiting for an apology that may never come. Waiting for a promotion that remains perpetually delayed. Waiting for external permission to start your project. Waiting for the market to be perfect. When you tell yourself, I have to wait, you are performing a subtle mental sleight of hand. You are substituting inertia for necessity. If the outcome were truly necessary, wouldn't you be devising alternate routes, building a ladder over the obstacle, or simply abandoning the goal entirely? The fact that you remain stationary proves that the current state of anticipation is momentarily more comfortable or less frightening than the terrifying action of redirection. You are choosing the familiar comfort of unresolved potential over the definite clarity of commitment or refusal. Recognizing waiting as a choice fundamentally shifts your psychological positioning from recipient to architect. You are no longer a victim of time. You become its negotiator. This insight demands that you establish clear temporal boundaries. What is your expiration date on this expectation? At what point does the hope you are currently preserving cease to be a productive investment and become a form of emotional hostage-taking? This is the moment where free will asserts its sharpest edge, not in changing the external future, but in definitively ending your internal dedication to one particular delayed narrative. The silence isn't empty, it is the space where you decide how much you are willing to spend. The silence of waiting is never empty. It is a ledger silently recording the weight of your chosen stillness, your dedicated pause. And the heaviest choice, the one that defines us most deeply, is always the one we pretend wasn't made at all. The universe that requires my action to proceed. The cosmological veto, the universe that requires your action to proceed. What if the grand tapestry of fate isn't pre-woven, but pauses eternally, held breath, waiting specifically for the thread only your hand can insert? We often treat destiny like a movie we are merely watching, fixed, inevitable, with all plot points predetermined before we ever took our seat. But the deeper, more unsettling paradox is the cosmological veto. It is the concept that suggests that, in specific crucial moments of cosmic bifurcation, those rare, true crossroads that define entire eras, the universal script locks up. The system reaches a singularity point that demands not observation, but input. It's not about seeing the future. It's about acknowledging that certain futures cannot be written until you, the conscious participant, press execute. This is not merely an optional exercise of free will. It is an obligation of necessary will. Picture the most complex, beautiful clockwork mechanism imaginable, the cosmos. Every gear is turning, every spring loaded, gravity humming along, the slow process of entropy ticking forward. Suddenly, a crucial relay switch comes into focus, a nodal point in causality that cannot be satisfied by algorithmic function or brute determinism. This switch isn't automatic. It requires a specific, personalized voltage spike, your decision. Until that spike occurs, the entire segment of causality downstream from that point is held suspended, a quantum fog of possibility frozen in time. The grand engine works for you, preparing the field and setting the stage, but it will not proceed to the next chapter until it is explicitly powered by your conscious mandate. You are not a passenger. You are the fuse in a critical circuit. This is where the terror of responsibility clashes violently with the seductive comfort of determinism. We crave the soothing release of knowing it was meant to be, the validation that our struggles are just steps in an unfolding design. Yet we are confronted with the terrifying opposite. Nothing will be until we force the issue. The paradox lies in the burden of the delay. Every second you spend paralyzed by what if isn't just wasted personal time. It is the universal timeline holding its breath, absorbing potential energy, awaiting your mandate. You aren't just delaying your life. You are delaying the emergence of the next set of consequences for everyone interacting with your choices, or for the paths that need to be cleared for others. Your personal inertia becomes a gravitational drag on the structure of time itself. If the universe requires the completion of your arc to unlock the next sequence of events for a larger system, then indecision is an act of cosmic sabotage. Think of the choices you are currently postponing, the resignation letter waiting to be sent, the difficult clarifying conversation that needs to happen, the commitment to a relationship or a path that you are hovering over but refuse to ground. You feel the intense stagnation, the heavy, viscous air of the pending decision. This heavy feeling is not just emotional weight, it is the universe's bottlenecking. You are not trapped by fate. You are actively trapping fate itself. You are holding the entire storyline of your immediate existence captive, refusing to turn the page, because the commitment to the next word is too heavy to bear. Understanding the cosmological veto transforms procrastination from a minor personal flaw into a profound philosophical failure. It requires you to treat decisiveness not as an admirable talent, but as a moral obligation to the flow of reality. When you finally choose, not necessarily making the perfect choice, but simply making a choice, you feel the immense, immediate relief of the entire system clicking forward. You realize you weren't fighting the tide of destiny. You were simply releasing the tide that had been held back. The philosophical weight shifts fundamentally, moving from the passive question, "What should I accept?" to the profound kinetic demand, "What must I activate?" You stop asking for permission and start giving the command. The script has done all the setup it can do. It is only waiting for one line, your opening declaration. Say it and watch the future rush in to meet you. The unchosen roots of every deliberate branch. The unchosen roots of every deliberate branch. Tonight, you find yourself at a threshold, believing fully in the sovereign power of the choice you are about to make. You are standing on the edge of a great deliberation, a career shift, a commitment, or perhaps the radical decision to simply rest. But before you step forward, ask yourself this: what are you standing on? Before you can select a deliberate path, who decided the geography from which you launched your agency? Is the most profound freedom merely the recognition and then the graceful acceptance of the boundaries you never chose to set? This concept explores the paradox of contextual dependency, the idea that every conscious act of free will is entirely conditioned, enabled, and shaped by necessary preconditions, the roots that we inherit, not select. We often view free will as a spontaneous, singular generation of pure intent springing forth from a vacuum. But intent requires structure. It requires the language you were taught, the culture that defined your values, the economic status of your parents, the chemical composition of the air you breathed as a child, and the precise moment in history you happen to arrive. We have the ability to choose the direction of the branch, yes, but we never choose the soil, the climate, or the fundamental gravitational pull that dictates the very maximum height of the trunk that gives the branch its possibility. Every decision you cherish as uniquely yours is, in reality, an outgrowth of a million prior non-choices. Consider the metaphor of the master architect preparing to design a building. They exercise immense creative freedom, selecting materials, scale, and aesthetic philosophy. Yet, their final design is inextricably bound by the unchosen parameters, the laws of physics, the local zoning regulations, the budget provided by a client they didn't create, and the specific geological structure of the ground site. If the ground is marshy, the architecture will be forced to accommodate deep, expensive pilings. The choice of the facade is deliberate, but the necessity of the foundation is absolute. The constraints, the roots, are what make the eventual deliberate branches possible, measurable, and structurally sound. The deep tension resides in the illusion of singularity. We desperately need our moments of agency to feel pure, isolated moments of radical self-creation. But they are echoes, complex responses to stimuli we didn't initiate. If you make the difficult conscious choice to practice patience in a stressful situation, that choice is only meaningful because you inherited a definition of patience, and because the stressful situation itself was an external event determined by chance and the actions of others. If you break away from a toxic familial pattern, that act of courage feels like 100% agency, but it was the unbearable pressure and pain of the inherited toxic root system, the unchosen context, that supplied the necessary force and clarity for the break. We are all authors writing the next chapter in a book whose previous hundreds of pages were written by ancestors, society, biology, and historical accidents. The essential conflict remains. How can we hold ourselves wholly responsible for the ultimate direction when the initial vector was defined by factors entirely beyond our control? Look closer at your life right now. You chose your current relationship, but you chose it using a template for love established by your caregivers, filtered through the societal expectations of your generation, and influenced by the pool of eligible partners available within your immediate geographical and professional radius. When you experience immense pride in a decision, you must simultaneously remember the unseen scaffolding that elevated you high enough to make that sophisticated choice. Conversely, when you observe or judge what you perceive as another's bad decision, this paradox demands radical empathy. The difference between your deliberate branches and theirs is often nothing more than the profound, unchosen difference in the quality of the root system and the violence of the storms they endured. Accepting this duality does not render free will obsolete, it simply relocates its effective domain. Free will is not the initial spark of creation, it is the highly nuanced, sophisticated steering of a deeply embedded, pre-existing current. This perspective alleviates the crushing pressure of absolute self-creation and replaces it with gratitude for favorable context, coupled with a profound humility. You are not a solitary God creating a universe from scratch. You are a magnificent steward. Your agency is the ongoing process of selecting which purpose to serve with the limited yet potent resources, capacities, and opportunities you were handed at birth. The challenge is to not waste the gifts of the unchosen. Your highest act of freedom is not in denying your roots, but in deciding which rare and necessary fruit your inherited foundation will ultimately bear. The branch is now unquestionably yours, but the integrity of the wood always remembers the soil from which it rose. The freedom to change everything but the beginning, the irrevocable genesis, the constraint of the first choice. You often feel the intoxicating weight of infinite possibilities, the paths you could yet take, the person you could become tomorrow. But have you ever truly felt the profound, humbling weight of impossibilities? The things that can never be undone, the choices that can never be unmade, yet must be carried and woven into the very fabric of your continuous present. This is the core paradox of Genesis, the constraint of the starting line. Let's define the fundamental constraint that dictates the topography of your destiny, Genesis. This is not just the philosophical beginning of time, but the irrevocable beginning of you. your genetic blueprint, the decade and location you were born, the economic stratum of your first home, the language you first learned to structure reality, the traumas and triumphs that laid the initial concrete of your worldview. These are the fixed historical variables of the equation that is your life. They are sealed, untouchable facts. Freedom, viewed through this lens, is not the utopian absence of boundaries, but rather the masterful, agile manipulation of the space within those boundaries. It is the realization that while you had no say in choosing your specific starting conditions, every subsequent movement, every deliberate act of transformation is absolutely, entirely yours. To illustrate this, imagine yourself as a powerful, singular river. The moment you are born, you are set high on a mountain range. That is your genesis. The slope of the land, the geology beneath you. The initial streams you merge with, these dictate your fundamental watershed orientation, north, south, east, or west. You are totally free to carve vast oxbows across the plains, to flood the surrounding terrain, to rush through canyons, or to meander lazily, changing your depth and speed at will. You possess complete agency over your journey to the sea, but you cannot, without fundamentally ceasing to be that specific body of water tracing its specific path, decide that your initial watershed orientation should have faced the opposite ocean. The river is sovereign, totally free, but only within the geography provided. The constraint defines the possibility. The mechanism of this paradox traps us through the illusion of retroactive causality. We exhaust unimaginable amounts of energy, wishing we could reach back into the sealed past and alter those fixed variables. If only I hadn't taken that job. If only I had been born elsewhere. If only I had spoken up sooner. This desperate, exhausting longing for a revised beginning is a subtle form of paralysis. It drains the vital energy required to maximize the reality you currently possess. The profound insight here is that the beginning is not a flaw to be corrected or a mistake to be nullified, but simply the necessary raw material you were gifted. If you were born into ease, that is your material. If you were born into complexity and struggle, that is your material. The freedom to change everything means accepting, without reservation, that the shape of the starting clay is the precise reason the final sculpture looks exactly as it does now. You cannot separate the masterpiece from the specific pressures and heats of its initial forging. The existential tension arises because the seductive, haunting potential for another life haunts the honest affirmation of the current one. But true existential agency is found when you cease fighting the foundation and begin designing the skyscraper upon it. How does this apply to you now, as you pause and listen? Think of the most foundational decisions you made 5 years ago, the person you chose to love, the promise you broke, the pivotal risk you either took or avoided. These things are now historical foundation. You cannot unlearn what you know, nor unlive what you have lived. But every single second that follows that fixed history is an open-ended narrative. If you feel chronically stuck or inhibited, you are likely spending your present energy trying to fight the foundations instead of building a new structure upon them. You are confusing the fixed, immutable past with the entirely flexible, contingent present. The psychological impact of internalizing this principle is a quiet, powerful liberation from regret. Regret, in its purest form, is fundamentally the deep, unfulfilled wish to change the beginning. When you internalize that the genesis, the starting line, is the one single thing you cannot and should not change, you shift all your generative energy, your creative will, your focus, your courage, entirely into the realm of the possible, the dynamic present, and the open future. It transforms ancient guilt into historical data and turns fate not into a pre-written ending, but into an immutable, supportive starting condition. This distinction is the difference between being trapped by your past and being powerfully supported by your past. The ultimate freedom is realizing that the boundaries set by your genesis are not cages designed to contain you. They are the shores of the deep, specific ocean you are destined and uniquely qualified to navigate. Rest now, knowing that your past is not your destination, only your launch pad. The destination is just the echo of the departure, the resonance of initial conditions. What if the final chapters of your life are merely the unavoidable sonic reflection of the first sentence you ever spoke, the first core decision you made, or the very context of your origin? Lie still and consider the immense, almost unbearable weight of your genesis. This is the concept that destiny is not a finish line placed randomly on the far horizon, something you rush toward, but rather a defined trajectory, meticulously set by the precise velocity and angle of your beginning, the moment of your departure. In the study of complex dynamics and chaotic systems, this is known as extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. For us, existing within the paradox of time, it means that every significant choice you make today is less of a spontaneous, free act and more of a predictable, inevitable consequence of the psycho-emotional architecture you established yesterday, last year, or perhaps decades ago. The focus shifts entirely away from where you are going and fixates instead upon how you initiated the journey. Imagine dropping a single smooth pebble into a perfectly tranquil pond. The destination of the ripple, its exact height, its velocity, its final shape as it breaks against the bank, is not a random occurrence discovered at the end of the process. It is mathematically dictated by the exact force, the specific height, and the angle of that initial singular drop. You can spend years observing the ripple, tracing its expansion, measuring its diminishing energy, but you can never fundamentally alter its final form without traveling backward to change the moment it began. You, the self observing now, are also a profound and expansive ripple in the pond of time. Your departure, that composite of your core beliefs, your foundational traumas, your first significant aspirations, set the immutable geometry of your ultimate shore. Here is where the paradox achieves maximum tension. We are creatures built for striving. We wake up daily, asserting the power of immediate pivots, correcting errors, believing in the radical potential of the present moment to change everything. Yet the gravitational pull of the departure is immense, perhaps infinite. Every new choice we perceive as free is fundamentally filtered through the lens of the established self, the self that departed from the starting point. We are not choosing randomly. We are choosing consistently with the self that was built by the initial conditions. The conflict is the sharp, persistent feeling of freedom clashing against the inescapable reality of causality. Does the river truly possess the agency to decide where it will go, or is it merely following the path of least resistance that was carved by the first droplet that descended down the slope? The subtle tension lies in the realization that our most vigorous efforts to deviate, to break free, are often the most defining, necessary, and predictable aspects of the original trajectory. Look deeply at your current state of being, your persistent relationships, the nature of your career satisfaction, the sources of your most recurrent anxieties. Are these genuine, spontaneous occurrences born of the present? Or are they the necessary, geometrically determined payoff of decisions, silent acceptances, or denials made 5, 10, or 20 years ago? When you encounter acute frustration today, pause and trace the emotional and actionable steps backward. Often, the current obstacle is not the core problem. It is merely the inevitable fruition of a long-ago seed you planted, perhaps in complete ignorance of its toxic potential. The destination, the echo, is not loud static or distortion. It is a clear, deep tone that perfectly reflects the frequency of the original sound. You hear what you started. The psychological weight of accepting this concept can be either deeply crushing or incredibly liberating. If the destination is an echo, then worrying obsessively about a distant future outcome becomes largely futile. All genuine effort, therefore, must be focused on refining the point of departure. It shifts our sense of existential responsibility from managing future outcomes, which may be entirely fixed, to rigorously examining and cleansing our past motivations. which define the trajectory. If the course is determined by the initial impulse, then true freedom lies not in the hopeless attempt to fight the constraints, but in deeply understanding them. We become less concerned with the spectacular, elusive nature of the destination and obsessively fascinated with the architecture of the initial self. Stop searching desperately for a distant finish line. Look behind you, deep into the shadow of your origin, for in the precise geometry of your first conscious step, you will find the undeniable blueprint for your last. The destination is not an arrival, it is merely the slow, unfolding completion of a loop that began the very moment you decided to move. The decision to stop making decisions. The paradox of autonomous abdication, the point where the exercise of free will culminates in the deliberate choice to abandon control. How many decisions do you believe you make in a single day? Thousands? Millions? And what happens when the accumulated weight of those possibilities becomes heavier than the potential rewards any single choice might offer? There is a quiet, profound exhaustion that sets in when the constant act of choosing begins to erode the value of the choice itself. You reach an inflection point, often in the deepest hours of the night, where you realize the burden of freedom is almost unbearable. This isn't merely about opting for the simplest path because you're momentarily tired, like grabbing fast food instead of cooking a gourmet meal. This is the philosophical crux of decisional cessation, the conscious decision, made with full awareness and agency, to remove future agency from specific draining domains of your life. It's an act of profound commitment, or perhaps profound surrender, where the last great choice you make is designed to minimize the necessity of the next great choice. It is the ultimate paradox of free will, where freedom is finally found not in the presence of infinite possibility, but in the self-imposed limitation of that choice pool. Imagine the ancient sailor, adrift and utterly exhausted, constantly adjusting the rigging and correcting the helm against a relentless, unpredictable current. He realizes that every micro-adjustment, every attempt to force the boat into compliance with his short-term desire, only accelerates his fatigue, never truly guaranteeing his distant destination. Finally, in an act of powerful will, he lashes the rudder in a fixed direction, lowers the smaller sails he can no longer manage, and decides to trust the great, overarching sweep of the ocean currents and the predictable logic of the weather systems. He hasn't given up the journey. He has simply delegated the immediate, draining navigation to the destiny he can no longer fight. He has chosen how he will surrender, which is the final, most powerful choice of all. The core conflict in choosing to stop choosing lies in the nature of intention itself. When you consciously abdicate responsibility for minor outcomes, is that choice truly a failure of will, or is it the highest demonstration of your will's power? You are using your freedom to create a binding contract with yourself, a contract stipulating that the continuous battle against minor fates is ultimately more exhausting than the acceptance of minor fates. The tension resides in the fear: are you lazy, or are you finally liberated? The insight that follows is that this conscious withdrawal shifts the responsibility for outcome, transforming your acute anxiety about the future into a quiet, meditative observation of the unfolding present. Look at your modern life. You are paralyzed by optimization. You spend 3 hours researching which coffee machine to buy, draining the mental reserves required for a decision that fundamentally changes nothing about your core purpose. The decision to stop making decisions is the necessary antidote to optimization paralysis. It is why you automate your bills, why you establish strict morning routines that never vary, or why you adopt a kind of intellectual uniform, not because you lack creativity, but because you are rigorously conserving your precious core attention for the choices that truly matter, the ethical, the emotional, and the relational crossroads. You are deciding where the free will muscle must be flexed and where it must rest. The psychological impact of this cessation is immediate and often profound. The fading of micro-choice grants immense clarity. When the debilitating noise of insignificant decisions fades, you begin to hear the foundational narratives of your life again. This act transforms the relentless pressure of "what should I do next" into the stable, centered observation of what is happening now. It is the philosophical and emotional difference between being the frantic, overworked architect of your life, constantly attempting to micromanage every detail, and becoming the patient, appreciative observer of the life that is already building itself around you. It realigns your focus from the infinite, stressful, branching paths of the theoretical future to the singular, unavoidable pressure of the present moment. Remember this: true agency is not merely the power to choose what you want, but the wisdom to choose what you no longer need to choose. The final, greatest choice you make is often the one that forever frees you from the tyranny of the endless next choice. You choose to stop choosing, and in that moment of profound cessation, you finally become fully present to the life that destiny has already decided you should live. The prisoner who designed the cell key. This is the paradox of the self-woven cage. The prisoner who designed the cell key. You often feel trapped, don't you? Hemmed in by circumstance, locked into trajectories that feel inevitable. But take a moment in the quiet depth of this hour and ask yourself a frighteningly intimate question. Who drew the blueprints for this confinement? What if the cell you struggle against is merely the most complex and sophisticated safety system you ever designed for yourself? What if the material of your shackles is simply your own brilliant but tragically unused ingenuity? This concept cuts to the deepest truth of agency, that our most stringent limitations are often elaborate defenses we constructed years ago, believing they were necessary protections against chaos, pain, or monumental failure. We confuse the comfort of the predictable constraint with the sheer, brute inevitability of fate. The moment we recognize that we were the ones who designed the lock, we are forced to accept that we inherently possess the knowledge of the tumblers, the sequence, and thus, the key. The prison is merely an inverted masterpiece of our own free will. Imagine a master architect, renowned for designing the most secure structures in the world. Driven by an almost paranoid need for control, he designs an ultimate, impenetrable vault, a perfect cell. To prove its absolute security, he voluntarily seals himself inside. He has ensured his own imprisonment. His fate is now absolute. Yet, he is the only person on the planet who knows the precise structural weak points, the exact calibration of the lock mechanism, the minute flaw that allows for ultimate egress. His freedom is physically impossible for anyone else, but for him it is an absolute certainty, contingent only on his decision to apply his own forgotten knowledge. This is your existential position. You, the prisoner, are also the architect. The tension, the agonizing paradox, lies not between you and the cell, but between the self that created the limit and the self that is trying to live beyond it. The prisoner self often forgets he was the architect. The cell becomes reality, not a construction. We mistake the routine of the cage for its structural integrity. We cling to the narratives that reinforce the walls. I am not smart enough, I am too late. I do not deserve happiness. These are not foundational truths of the universe. They are the steel bars forged in the crucible of past self-doubt. The mechanism of this paradoxical escape is the terrifying implication of responsibility. The moment you accept that you built the prison, you strip away the comfortable excuse of external victimhood. You must confront the fear that freedom was always an option, which means you consciously or subconsciously chose the cell for a specific, often painful reason. Perhaps the cage offered safety from the vulnerability of the outside world. Perhaps the walls buffered you from the terrifying weight of infinite choice. Where do you see this self-woven cage in your modern life? It's in the job you perpetually hate but maintain because, well, that's just how life is supposed to look. It's the toxic relationship you justify by saying, I'm just not built for peace. These are not cosmic decrees handed down by destiny. They are boundaries drawn by a past version of yourself desperately seeking predictability. You mistake repetition for permanence, and in doing so, you keep turning the key to lock yourself back in. The realization that the chains are made of thought and therefore can be unthought is the ultimate psychological earthquake. It shifts the entire axis of control. Destiny ceases to be an external imposition. It becomes, instead, the predictable sum of your past free choices, crystallizing into your present experience. To escape, you don't need new materials, you need historical memory. You need to remember the architectural brilliance required to design such an effective prison in the first place, and then apply that same powerful intellect to dismantle it. This requires more than breaking down walls. It requires dissolving the foundational belief that walls are needed at all. Sleep now, under the terrifying but liberating sovereignty of this knowledge. Know that the most guarded secrets to your freedom are the ones you sealed inside yourself. The key is never found outside the perimeter. It is simply remembered, deep within the heart of the prison's original designer. Those who arrive here understand more than words. Leave a word below that captures what you felt tonight, and share it with someone who still searches for meaning.